Good morning, everyone. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is Jamal Thomas Show. Jesus, I have something in my throat just before starting the show. I hope you guys are doing okay this morning. Monday mornings are always difficult, even when it's not necessarily morning where you are. It still feels like a morning. But nevertheless, I hope you guys are doing well. I hope you guys are safe. I hope you guys are having, at the very least, a good night. That's assuming you are on the East Coast. If you are somewhere else, I hope you had a good day. I'm not going to be, what do they call it? That's a word for it. But either way, I'm glad that you guys can join me, whoever, wherever you are, that you are under the sound of this voice, that I appreciate you for being here. You could be anywhere. So the fact that you are here, I deeply, deeply appreciate it. We have a very strong show for you today. Brian Berletic is going to start off at 7:15. Mark Sleboda is going to continue at 8:15. And I'm hoping Danny Haiphong is going to show up at 9:15 or 9 o'clock. We will see. Either way, the first two, bad self or strong, then it is icing on the cake. So there is that. I want to start off showing this. Trigger warning, by the way. This is a man dying. This is a man dying. Man trying to get food, did not accomplish the objective, but instead he ends up dying. I don't know what he's saying, but needless to say, he was shot by a sniper in Gaza. He was able to pick it up on his cell phone. He got the footage. His family released the footage. A man dying. Here are other people dying. My ex asked me, why do you watch stuff like that? Why do you take time out to sit there and watch people get killed? You're bearing witness. There's a genocide taking place. And this idea of trying to pretend that it's not, I think it's nonsense. And we should see what it means in real terms, not in this conceptual space where you can kind of ignore it and have some weird conversations about it. No, what is it like in real terms? What does it look like when people are trying to get food and getting shot for trying to get food? What does it look like when people are being starved to death and they drop on the streets, children included? What does it look like? Not conceptual. What does it look like in real terms? It looks like stuff like that. The people who are committing this genocide, however, are also, interestingly enough, taking losses. This is a couple, Mermet, killed this afternoon in Rafah. Apparently they were having lunch. You can look at them and see they didn't need that lunch. But that was the last lunch that they ever had. Both of them could have done without that lunch. Not just because they got shot, but for blatantly obvious reasons. And they look very happy about taking a nail. So, don't feel too bad. This one is the funniest thing in the world to me. I would tell you when I'm about to do the show and I finally, it's like, all right, gotta do the show, gotta get dressed, all that. It feels like Magneto in that scene on the X-Men. I don't know if you remember the movie Final Days. X-Men Final Days, something like that. I can't think of the exact name of it. But there is this epic scene where Magneto stands up and it's like a man is about to do work. And he walks out knowing he's most likely going for his death. But at the very least, is going to hold the line as they try to do this kind of last mission and operation. I imagine this guy had the same semblance of thought in his mind as he was getting ready and getting prepared to go out and kill people. I'm not going to play the music because music is ridiculous. But this scrawny guy is putting on armaments, bulletproof vests, doing all this stuff, looking into the camera. He's like, I'm a badass. This badass got killed. In fact, his entire team got eliminated. I keep saying it is a weird thing that seemingly more Israelis are getting killed in the pursuit of murdering and committing a genocide. It is a wild thing to be. And nobody has really come up with a justification or reason of why more and more and more seem to be getting killed at a faster rate. I don't understand it. I don't quite get it. And nobody has quite explained it to me, but I'm not going to cry over it. Drink my coffee and watch. So, hey, whew, that's some strong coffee. That is some strong coffee. Interestingly enough, AOC, Marjorie Taylor Greene, wanted to take $500 million out of the money that we give to Israel because we continuously pay them to commit that genocide. And if we were not given the money and weapons to commit that genocide, they would be impossible or would not be capable of doing so. Israel is a colony of squatters. It is not this great military in the way that people think they are. They can't produce their own stuff in the quantities necessary to commit the genocide. They have to get it from us. Now, you could say, hey, they're great at murdering women and children. I would agree with you. Fair enough. They can shoot dangerous babies left and right, and they can be very successful at doing so. They can starve large amounts of the population. They can rape people on camera. Agreed. You have my agreed. But you can't call yourself this magnificent military force if the only thing and the only way you're able to do that is by getting weapons, equipment, supplies, etc. from the United States and having the U.S. prop up your economy. Don't give me the stuff about you being awesome when you can't be awesome on your own. So AOC, Marjorie Taylor Greene, I keep saying that, Marjorie Taylor Greene, true believer, came out and was like, why are we continuously putting money into this genocide? Why are we doing this? So she wanted to pull $500 million from money going to Israel. There were, if I'm not mistaken, 6 people that voted with her on that bill. One of those people was not AOC. Was not AOC. Now, if you remember when AOC first got into office, AOC was somewhat of a hard ass on the issue of Israel and Gaza. Lo and behold, what a difference a few years in Congress under the tutelage of Mama Bear has made. This is AOC's statement about why she did not support Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment or bill. Marjorie Taylor Greene's amendment does nothing to cut off offensive aid to Israel, nor does it end the flow of munitions being used in Gaza. Of course I voted against it. Well, that's a weird statement. Puts you in mind of Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell once argued that the reason he didn't support Obamacare is because Obamacare didn't cover everybody. He's like, wait, so giving 20 million people health care, it's sufficient for you because not everybody gets covered. So if everybody got it covered, you'd agree? No. What a nonsense argument. Well, this doesn't really stop everything, so I'm not really for it. Ain't that something? What it does do is cut defensive Iron Dome capabilities while allowing the actual bombs killing Palestinians to continue. I've long stated that I do not believe that adding to the death count of innocent victims in this war is constructive to that end. This is a simple and clear difference of opinion that has long been established. I remain focused on cutting the flow of the U.S. munitions that are being used to perpetuate the genocide in Gaza. So you acknowledge that a country of squatters are committing a genocide. You acknowledge that. On top of that, though, your issue is, well, look, this only prevents the country that's committing a genocide to defend themselves. And I would prefer that the country that is committing the genocide be able to defend themselves while they commit this genocide. What I'm against is sending more weapons for the genocide. What? Somebody made the point of saying, so you are for giving the shooter body armor as they go and commit their shooting, which is effectively what she is arguing, that I need the people who are committing the genocide to be able to defend themselves as they commit the genocide. And I don't want to prevent them from being able to defend themselves as they're committing a genocide. And so I'm going to vote against sending the country that's committing a genocide $500 million. That's outrageous. That is Orwellian in the way that you wrap yourself in a pretzel to try to defend this particular situation and this particular argument that AOC is effectively making. That is outrageous. I acknowledge they're committing a genocide, but I need them to be able to defend themselves as they commit their genocide. Really? Is that what you need them to do? You need people who are murdering and starving people in mass to be able to defend themselves as they murder and starve people in mass. And that the only way you would really support anything is if you stop giving them weapons. That is amazing. That is amazing. Liberals, AOC. That is the person who AOC has become, a genocide-backing congresswoman who, at one point, over and over again, has been a failure. What has she done in Congress? Sure. What has been even the agitation? If you remember when it was the $15 an hour issue, AOC wouldn't stand up for that. If you remember going back to the whole Gaza thing, the moment that she got in Congress, her point of view on the issue of Gaza radically shifted and changed. And now she is out here making this argument that Israel needs to defend itself, which is, by the way, the argument that Israel makes. I killed that dangerous baby because that baby was dangerous, and we need to defend ourselves against that dangerous baby. So, that's what we're doing. I'm saying this is a trash argument. This is a trash point of view that AOC is making. She should be ashamed of herself for even trying to make this argument. It's one thing to vote against the bill. Don't give us a bullshit argument as to why you're voting against Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill. You think people are stupid. They're not stupid. All things being equal, AOC, just like the Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, are lemmings on the issue of Israel. And over again, they vote against America's own self-interest in the self-interest of a foreign government, which is what AOC is doing right here. Some of her minions, some of her sycophants may try to make arguments for what AOC was doing. Shut up. Shut up. The reality of it is you're voting against the bill to cut nearly $1 billion, $500 million out of a country that you verbally acknowledge is committing a genocide. I don't care about your reasons. I don't care about your rationale. It is what you did. It is what takes place in law. So don't give me this nonsense about excuses for AOC. Don't tell me that, she's playing a game. I don't care what game she's playing. Right now, in real world, physical matter, reality terms, I don't care that the bill didn't pass. I care about who is willing to support that bill and who is not willing to support that bill. And for all of this talk about AOC can be president of the United States, really? Really? She doesn't have a spine. She doesn't have a spine. And all things being equal, maybe she just fundamentally agrees. Because after all, she voted against the bill that would have cut hundreds of billions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars out of Israel's capability of murdering and starving people en masse. That guy who you saw dying is not the only one. They're killing nearly 100 people a day. And they've normalized the killing of 100 people a day. They've created this kind of weird Hunger Games thing where people who are starving are trying to get food, and they take shots at the people who are trying to get food because those people are starving. I can show you videos of children dying on the street because they have effectively starved to death. And AOC's argument here seems to be, well, we need to protect the people who are starving the people to death because, that's just the right thing to do, according to AOC. She's out of her mind. She's out of her mind. And in the same way that what you do says something about you, what you vote for or what you vote against says something about you, this clearly and obviously says something about AOC. This argument is bizarre on its face. The Germans are committing a genocide and they're trying to create Lebensraum, but hey, we need to give them the ability to protect themselves against people who are trying to stop them from committing a genocide. Really? Is that what you're arguing to me? The people who are throwing people in camps, who are putting people in ovens, you need to protect those people because, hashtag reasons. That's a weird argument to make to me. But that is the argument that AOC has made. That is the argument she's making. That should tell you something about her. That should tell you something about her. That's all I'm saying. Brian is going to be on shortly. And so I can't necessarily go to a completely different story. I will show you this, though. Kiev is burning. Russia's continuing their attacks. They're using chemzog missiles. Chemzog, I think I said that right. Chemzog missiles. These are the hypersonic missiles going at like 15,000 miles per hour. Just obscene speeds in engineering. This is Kiev getting hit. Now, what's wild about this is that with all of them, one person. And by the way, I'm drinking coffee not because I'm applauding this. I'm drinking coffee just from drinking coffee. I don't applaud what's taking place in Ukraine. Yeah. One person killed. Ain't that amazing? Under normal circumstances, when Israel attacks anybody, 50 people dead, 30 people dead. What's the media often makes this argument that, well, Russia's just killing civilians willy-nilly. Dude, one person dead, and you have the largest missile and drone strike on Kiev in the entirety of this war. It doesn't seem like they're killing civilians willy-nilly. It seems like they're very targeted in what they're effectively gone after. Don't take my word for it. I think I have. Maybe I don't have it up. Obviously, though, this is not them willy-nilly killing civilians. Those are different things. That's what Israel does. That doesn't seem to be what the Russians do. There are differences in those things. Another story that has come out, and let me see if I can find this, is on Zelensky. So there seems to be, I'll say it that way. There seems to be some level of agitation in the Western media to get rid of Zelensky. Now, Seymour Hersh, who has done fantastic work, who was one of the only people to predict the attack on Iran. I mean, granted, we said it was going to take place. I think I was even saying it. But in a media sense, was going after this notion that they were trying to change the government of Iran, which is exactly what they were trying to do. Seymour Hersh got it right. Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Just checking on Brian. Time zones can be a pain in the ass. And I think he's an hour behind me. Some of the people from Europe are 6 hours behind me. People from Russia are 6 or 5. It's just all over the place. Seymour Hersh got it right when Seymour Hersh came out with his article talking about the U.S.'s objective of basically overthrowing the government of Iran. Now, they were not able to accomplish their objective. Iran surprised the hell out of them with their capability of being able to push back on that level of aggression and being able to reorganize their forces and go on the attack and on the offensive. They were able to get air superiority over Israel in a way that Israel was not able to stop their missiles. And so Seymour Hersh, My Lai massacre, got it right. Seymour Hersh came out with an article called The End of Zelensky. Now, this article is interesting on a few counts. What the article basically argues is that Washington is sick of Zelensky and believes he's the main impediment for getting anything accomplished in Ukraine, and that they are trying to replace Zelensky with Zelensky. Now, some of the parts of this article goes awry. In one case, they try to make the argument that Russia has lost like 2 million people or 2 million casualties. That seems outrageous, especially when you're looking at the number of death tolls, how many bodies Russia gives over versus the number of bodies Ukraine gives over. And you look at the number of, let's say, the movement that seems to be taking place. This seems to be an argument that he's getting from the US or from Ukraine. We'll put that argument to the side for the moment. I get they come up with an argument like that, challenges the integrity of the peace as a whole. But what they're effectively arguing is, all right, Trump gave 50 days. And is the thought in this that in that time frame, you try to get rid of Zelensky, or at the very least come up with a, let's say, a quote unquote propaganda exercise to damage Zelensky's political capabilities in Ukraine in a way that you can try to get rid of him and put somebody else in. Now the catch becomes, put somebody else in to do what? Who are you putting in the context of doing something different than what Zelensky is effectively doing? Now, it wasn't just this article, it was several that came out. This one, Financial Times, questioning Zelensky accused of authoritarian slat after anti-corruption raids. You have another one, Ukrainians have lost faith in Zelensky, on Matthews. Meaning all of this stuff came out at the exact same time. And the question that people are asking is, why is it coordinated? And if it's coordinated to what end? Even if you got rid of Zelensky and you've replaced him with Zelensky, okay, what? Do you believe that a U.S. president is going to accept Russian terms? Is that what they thought? That Zelensky is more malleable and in the context of being more malleable, is more open and willing to accept whatever dictates coming out of Washington in this case. Well, I've made the argument before that the issue is less about Ukraine and the issue is more about the United States. If Donald Trump threatened to walk, Zelensky will bend over and spread his ass cheeks, literal and figuratively. Meaning one report after the next has been made very clear that the main mover and shaker in maintaining operations of this war is the money and support coming from the US. If the US stops intelligence, if the US stops the money, then the war will grind to a halt, and will grind to a halt far more readily than it would if the United States continue to give money and weapons. Now, Trump may not want to do that because Donald Trump wants to make a deal, and he doesn't necessarily want to look weak, and walking away may look weak from the US perspective. And Trump may get blamed for losing the war, which is outlandish. Ukraine has already lost the war. So Trump may actually want somebody who's more amenable to make it some kind of concessions in a way where the US can look strong as it pulls back and say, okay, we got our deal. Maybe. I'm very skeptical that a US president can accept the terms that Russia is providing, especially if Donald Trump already doesn't want to look weak for walking away. What does it look like if you accept Russia terms? And can you create this perspective of a victory in that context? I'm skeptical. I'm very, very skeptical. Simplicus the thinker, right here, has a really good piece going through Seymour Hersh's piece. And it's coming to this kind of similar assessment of, okay, they're trying to flush Zelensky to what end? What do they think they're going to get out of getting rid of Zelensky? And I don't really have an answer for that. I mean, Zelensky may be more popular for a period of time, but if you're not willing to end the war, then what does it matter? And what are you willing to give to end the war? Russia has been very clear on their objectives. We want the 5 regions, so now part of Russia, full stop. That is not negotiable. These are part of the Russian Federation, and they will remain so. And you either accept this or the war continues. You have Europe, who's coming out literally talking about using Ukraine as a platform to launch attacks on Russia. Okay, so that's effectively NATO starting a war with Russia. Now, how does Russia accept any terms of this? Meaning the war continues. Let's say Donald Trump does get somebody who's more amenable to his wants, quote unquote, in this position. Is he still willing to accept that the 5 regions are part of Russia? Is he still willing to accept no expansion of NATO, and I mean that in real terms? Is he still willing to accept no peacekeepers, quote unquote, European troops in Ukraine? And if Europe keeps saying that they're going to do that, then how does the war ever end? Ukraine, or let's say Europe, seems to be preparing for some kind of conflict with Russia. And they seem to want Ukraine to die, or Ukrainians to die, almost as a staying maneuver to allow them time to build up whatever weapons industries they're coming up with. And what I mean by staying maneuver is, let's say that it takes a Ukrainian 5 minutes to die. Yes, this is correct. But let's say every new Ukrainian that's put on the battlefield, it takes them 5 minutes to get killed. All right. And how many Ukrainians do you need to expand the war out for a year, for 2 years? That's what I mean by holding maneuver. We need you all to die while we prepare for a conflict or a standoff with the Russians. That seems to be what they're attempting. Will their economy support that? Doubtful, but unclear. Who knows what's going to happen in a year or two? Will their people be okay with being fed to the Russians, to a wood chipper? Again, unclear, doubtful, unclear. But this is one of those things where ultimately we're going to see how this pans out. Fact of the matter is, like I said, Trump could have walked. Trump could have walked. Trump didn't walk. And because Trump didn't walk, this is where we are, where this is now Donald Trump's war. I'm sorry. It's now Donald Trump's war. He owns it. He can't keep running around saying this belongs to Joe Biden. This is Joe Biden's war. Can't do it. Can't do it. It's on him. It's his war at this point. I want to go to another issue. Oh, by the way, right here. This kind of the point that I'm making, where the Russophobia that's taking place in Europe is based on just propaganda. Russia strikes on Kiev, kill one, and calls fires across Ukraine's capital. One person. And yes, even one civilian getting killed is horrible, but it's not the 50, 60, 80, 100 a day that you're seeing coming out of Israel. And if you're launching hundreds of drones and chemical missiles, and you kill one person when you're launching that much of an arsenal, are they really trying to kill civilians? Are they really, indiscriminately killing civilians? Obviously, the answer is no. Obviously, the answer is no. So there is that. Donald Trump has been threatening BRICS. I'm fascinated by this. I'm fascinated by this. So this is Trump once again waging a subversive war against BRICS nations. Wait, I strongly suspect that him going after Lula had everything to do with BRICS. I strongly suspect it. Now, Lula has taken this to political advantage by drawing a circle around Bolsonaro, saying Donald Trump, this gringo, as he calls him, is trying to interfere in our political space and is trying to protect Bolsonaro and is pointing his finger directly at Bolsonaro, which you can imagine if a government has any notion of sovereignty and any notion of, we control our own affairs, we'll have some feelings about a U.S. president trying to draw a circle around somebody that he wants to be protected. And by virtue of drawing a circle around him to protect him, is doing the opposite in a political and legal space in Brazil that is going after Bolsonaro. Now, for the politics of it, Lula has been on fire, pointing out this gringo is not going to tell us what to do. We're going to do what we will. If he wants to pass tariffs, then F it, let him pass his tariffs. This is the way that Brazil has been dealing with this. This is the way that all other countries around the world should deal with it. If the U.S. wants to pass tariffs on the entirety of the world, F it. Let him do it. Let him do it. Prove it. Show it. Show how strong you are as an individual nation as you pass tariffs on the world and see what happens to your country as you do so. That is the way Lula is responding to it. That's the way Lula should respond to it. But I strongly suspect that I think it's like 50% or something has more to do with fear of BRICS. Fear of BRICS. This is Trump expressing his fear of the BRICS nations coming together and potentially dumping the dollar.
This will increase demand for U.S. Treasuries, lower interest rates, and secure the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency for generations to come. The reserve currency is so important. If we lost that, that would be like losing a world war. We can never let anyone play games with us. And that's why when I heard about this group from BRICS, 6 countries basically, I hit them very, very hard. And if they ever really form in a meaningful way, it will end very quickly. I will tell you, for them, they won't be gone very long. I don't think they'll even do it. They're virtually afraid to meet.
He's out of his mind. He's out of his mind. He's out of his mind. Look, I will tell you, BRICS wouldn't exist if it wasn't for this rules-based order of the United States. And it's the rules-based order that got those countries to come together in the first place and saying, this is unacceptable for us, we're not going to accept this. And the idea that the U.S. can take people off the SWIFT system, the idea that Europe and the U.S. can steal hundreds of billions of dollars from countries, what incentive does that give to other countries? Well, the obvious incentive is we can't allow this to continue. This is outrageous. The idea that one country made up of 5% of the globe can turn around and try to destroy other countries economically is outrageous. So we need to come up with a new system that would allow us to function and operate beyond the capability of the U.S. to do anything about it. Now, Trump, to give him credit, is the only president that really brought up BRICS in this way. Many other presidents, Joe Biden, never brought it up. But whether you bring it up or not, those countries are getting together, and those countries have come together for very specific reasons. Those reasons being, we need to be able to A, protect ourselves, B, come up with a new financial order that protects us. And not just protects us, it's our betterment. When China and Brazil are trading in their own currencies, is that to the betterment of those countries? Well, yeah. When Russia's saying we're trading in 90% of our own currency, well, you can imagine, okay, so what does it mean for the dollar? It means that the dollar is not necessarily all that important in that context. Meaning, Donald Trump feels the breath of change on his neck. And feeling the breath of change on his neck is trying to do something about it. Kind of. I suspect a lot of this is just talk. But the reality of it is, what can the president do? Now, if you are sane, if you're rational, you don't take this maximalist approach of being a bully and saying, well, we're going to put tariffs on those countries. When you putting tariffs or using the dollar as a weapon is the entire reason that those countries have come together in the first place. If anything, what Donald Trump is doing here in that statement is creating the justification for BRICS to exist. Full stop. I do think BRICS is being a bit too cute by half on some of this stuff. When they're like, yeah, we're not doing anything against the West. We're not challenging the dollar. We're not doing it. Your very existence is a challenge to the rule-based order. Meaning when the U.S. is rules for us, we do whatever we want. We set rules for you. The very existence of BRICS and the very existence of a system that is set up to, let's say, get around that undermines the ability and the capability of the U.S. to function in this kind of rules-based order way. So yeah, I get why they would say it. They would say it for political reasons. We're not trying to change, upset the apple cart. We just want something better for the global South and something that is better in our interests, etc. But by virtue of you wanting something better for the global South, by virtue of you wanting something better for yourselves, it is to the detriment of Western nations that sought to take advantage and exploit the global South countries, or for that matter, exploit those countries that are involved in BRICS currently. I understand why they say it, but it's nonsense. They are obviously looking out for their betterment. This is zero sum. If it's better for me, it's worse for you, especially if I'm trying to set rules that are against your interests, which is what the US and Europe has been doing for centuries or for decades. So Trump feels that breath on his throat, feels it. It's palpable. He keeps bringing it up. He brings it up over and over and over again. But he can't do anything about it.
Demand for U.S. Treasuries, lower interest rates, and secure the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency for generations to come. The reserve currency is so important. You know, if we lost that, that would be like losing a world war. We can never let anyone play games with us. And that's why when I heard about this group from BRICS, 6 countries basically, I hit them very, very hard. And if they ever really form in a meaningful way, it will end very quickly. I will tell you, for them, they won't be.
Think of how bizarre it is for a country to literally make the argument that you must use our dollar. How weird is that? You must use the dollar. You must use it. Or else what? Or else we're going to take economic activities in order to damage you. So you're saying that you are trying to force other countries to use your currency. That is the argument that you're effectively making. And you cannot understand why those countries will not want to use your currency when you are standing here making the argument that they must. It's bizarre. It's completely bizarre. Now, let's be very honest. Let's be very honest. This has nothing to do about right or wrong. Most things aren't right or wrong. It's an issue of power. And in the issue of power, what Donald Trump said there is on some level true. If they stop using the dollar, it will be equivalent to us losing a world war. Because at that point, you're talking about effectively our capability of creating $10 trillion out of thin air to go to war is eviscerated. How does the U.S. pay back the debt of $36 trillion when it no longer is a reserve currency? How do you do that? What does it do to the US when you have $36 trillion of debt and you're no longer the reserve currency? That's what Trump is seeing. That's what he's responding to. But the way he's responding to it is, of course, like a hegemon. We are in charge. We tell everyone what to do. And because we're in charge, we tell everyone what to do. We have the expectation that all of these countries are going to follow suit. And I'm telling you, they're not. They're not. Trump will not get his way on this. It's admirable that he acknowledges the issue, but the way he's going about it is the exact same reason and rationale why BRICS exists. And they will continue to grow. They're 40-something% of the global economy as we speak. And you have country after country after country that is chomping at the bit to be part of BRICS. That train has left the barn. There's nothing that the US president is going to be able to do about it that is not going to make the situation either worse or make it exacerbated where it proceeds at a faster clip. That horse is out the barn. Now, part of this is also part of the rationale that the US has been going after Iran, China, and Russia. Those countries are almost like the stabilizing force for BRICS. And if you're looking at this, especially in a military sense, if you're going after Russia and you can damage Russia, or if you can damage China, what does it mean for the rest of the BRICS organization if the two main countries in a military and economic and industrial sense are destroyed or at the very least undermined? You damaged the entire institution. It's not a coincidence that the US went after Russia. It's not a coincidence at all. Nor is it a coincidence that they allowed their minion, Israel, to go after Iran. Not a coincidence at all. Nor is the Asian pivot that Donald Trump and the United States has wanted to do for the last several decades has been a coincidence. They just haven't been able to get around to China in a direct sense of the term. But they understand. Look, what it boils down to is that the United States is trying to maintain this hegemony. And for all of this talk that Donald Trump gives about multipolarity and stuff is nonsense. The US is trying to have hegemony on the cheap. And by the cheap, what I mean by that is using this kind of diversification of resources. We want Israel to deal with Iran in the Middle East. We want Europe to deal with Russia. We want to pivot over to Asia and deal with China. That's what they want. That's still hegemony. That is you controlling other countries to accomplish your objectives as opposed to you doing it directly because you realize you don't have the capability of doing it directly. Now, the problem that they're running into is that there are economic concerns that the United States also want to accomplish. So they don't want Europe to build their own weapons. They want buy their weapons from us. Well, when you have a bottleneck of this capability of creating patriots, a bottleneck of creating, let's say, missiles and weapons that you would use on, let's say, the European battlefield. Okay, well, now you have a problem. Not only do you want to have this kind of hegemony, you want to do so by making a buck in having this hegemony. You need to pick a pony. Either you allow Europe to build their own systems, build their own weapons, come up with their own industry, in which case you can kind of have Europe to do that. But again, if you do that, you lose a certain amount of control and influence over Europe. The US is trying to create a hegemonic order under a guise of multipolarity. And under that guise of this kind of multipolarity in the way that the United States sees it, it wants to be able to control the world using other countries as proxies in doing so, with the exception of China, where it wants to get involved. But even China has proxies, Philippines, Taiwan, etc. So I don't think that's going to work, but that seems to be what they're reaching for and what they're trying to accomplish. We'll see. Personally, I think the horse is off the barn. I don't think there's any way to slow down, stop, or inhibit this changing of the global order. What freaks me out in the changing of the global order is whether the U.S. will end it all as opposed to giving up control. I don't have an answer for that. Don't have an answer for that. That terrifies me. That completely terrifies me. Let's move to another story. Epstein. We have talked about Epstein right much. I'm not an Epstein head in the way that many people are. But there is something about this that's creepy not just the sex with kids stuff. It goes beyond that. If indeed the argument for Epstein is true, where you have an intel guy who is using video, audio, whatever kind of media of influential people having sex with children and is holding that over their heads in order to compel behavior, that's a big deal. Because questions could be raised about what level of influence do, let's say, external factors have on US government officials, which means that you can't take this argument of there's nothing to see here, folks, let's just move on. That argument doesn't fly, that argument doesn't work, especially under the model to which Epstein is cast. Acosta pointed out that Epstein is intel. And if indeed Epstein is intel to what end? Mossad, CIA. And if you kind of bring this question up of intel in what sense? In the sense of getting compromising information on political media, etc. All right. Then who are these people who are compromised? And are these people in our government? Are these people in our media space? Are these people in our financial system? What is the level of compromisation that we're dealing with? For Donald Trump to throw his bodies on these people and act as if, or not just act as if, to protect pedophiles is outrageous. It's outrageous. So when people are making this argument going after Trump for this, they're not wrong. They're not insane. When you have members of MAGA who are going after Trump for this seems to be, even for them, a bridge too far. Now, Alex Jones and Steve Bannon, who have been obviously massive Trump supporters, have come out and given a statement.
Oh, there's 14 terabytes.
That Alex Jones knows where his bread is buttered. He knows where his bread is buttered. He knows that his audience believes that there is a there to this. So Alex Jones can only go so far in straying away from this main notion of why is Trump not giving up the information. I want to play a small clip from Bannon and Jones. I love this. This is just fantastic. A small clip from them talking about the Epstein thing.
The media, I get this morning, the media is reporting that you've divorced yourself from President Trump. I think it's probably farthest from the truth. Can you just explain to the audience for a second this Epstein situation and your ongoing relationship with the president and supporting his policies and him?
Absolutely. I'd love to clarify that. CNN, Wall Street Journal, the front of Drudge was basically the Democrat Party mouthpiece. Jones divorces Trump. Trump divorces him and anybody else that questions Epstein. That is totally not true. They've taken little short clips out of context, as they always do. I love the president. He has incredible courage. He's getting so much done on the economy, the border, national security. They're really ramping up deportations. They're now found 30,000 of the missing children, and prosecutions are beginning. They've fired Maureen Comey that ran with her father, the Epstein case.
So he has to come out and point out, look, if anybody who's seen Alex Jones over the past, week or two, Alex Jones looked like he was about to off himself. Over and over again, Alex Jones has been pointing out, I don't understand why the president is doing this. I don't understand why the president doesn't expose the files. I don't understand why the president so-and-so. When people are talking about him divorcing himself from Trump, that's what they're talking about. Because over and over again in the Epstein case, his audience, paranoid, conspiracy theorists, I think he may even agree with that, that label. You have told them that Epstein has been raping kids and has been feeding kids to other adults and using the videos and audio and whatever else to use over their heads for political, or let's say for intelligence rationale. Basically, you're using intel as a way of compelling behavior and using these videos and everything else to hold it over people's heads as you compel their behavior. Influence operation, right? It's like a nasty honeypot. That's your audience. Your audience are true believers. Like, of all the audiences in the world that will believe this expansive nature of this intel operation, these demonic sycophants who are doing this stuff to kids and to children, it is Alex Jones' audience that will believe it. Hook, line, sinker. They will swallow it whole. So that same Alex Jones, who has that same audience, a belief set, who believes that this stuff is expansive, that there are thousands of children, and that all of these people are demonic and satanic who are willing to do this stuff to kids, you have to deal with that audience. And in you're dealing with that audience, you also have to walk this line of, I don't understand why Trump is not releasing the files. I don't understand why Trump is not telling the truth. I don't understand why Trump is so-and-so. And so now Steve Bannon gets him on the show and is telling Alex Jones, walk the plank. Tell me how much you love the president. Explain it to us. And simultaneously, how the Epstein thing, on some level, shouldn't tarnish the president's reputation because the president is getting a bunch of stuff done. Even though I don't understand why the president is protecting pedophiles. Oh, that's a hell of a plank to walk. That is a hell of a plank to walk, right? How do you walk that plank? How do you explain that to your audience that we should back a guy who's protecting pedophiles? How do you do that? And yet, Jones is stuck with the unenviable task of doing just that. It is fascinating to watch. It is fascinating to watch. And look, I know a lot of these people have been pointing out that Jones seemed to be divorcing himself from Donald Trump. Divorce? Maybe. I mean, I suspect that Jones assumed that Trump would release the files. And when those files weren't released, Jones now put in a spot that Jones doesn't quite want to be in because it is uncomfortable for Jones to be in that spot. You're stuck with it, bro. Stuck with it. You have boosted your audience on this stuff. This is the what is the manna from heaven that you fed to your audience. And now you're stuck with having to deal with the consequences of the fallout. When most likely the president's name is in that list. The president doesn't want to release that list because it is humiliating to the president to release those files. And I get Pam Bondi is releasing some of the legal court stuff. So what? So what? I don't care. What people wanted were the Johns. Who are the Johns? That is the question I've asked for the last 3 years. Where are the Johns? If you're putting the man in prison, you're saying he is an apex predator. Okay, fair enough. You're saying we have evidence of the fact he's an apex predator again. Okay, fair enough. Accept all of it. But then you're saying, but we can't find the Johns. We don't know what they are. We don't know who they are. We don't, the Johns are somehow missing out of this process. How are the Johns missing? How do you arrest the guy if you don't know what the Johns are, right? And yet, that is what the Trump administration is asking us all to accept, that we are effectively idiots, that we are brains or meat with nothing in between our heads. I don't think that's going to go over well, nor do I think that's going to be accepted. Don't think that's going to be accepted. Let's see. Let's hit another story while we wait. Mark, it's consistent. He will be here at 8:15 either way. I want to hit this. Whoa, not that. Not bad. Tulsi Gabbard, DNI, has released a huge amount of information about Russiagate. And in releasing this information about Russiagate, it becomes clear at this point that the U.S., under Obama, knew full well that Russia was not running influence operations in the United States. I'm trying to find the documentation for it. They cherry-picked one piece of information and data point after the next. And in cherry-picking these pieces of data points, right here, for example, is this one. Okay, so Danny Haiphong will not be joining us. I gotta be honest with you, Danny is flaky, which is why I said hopeful he'll join us. I'll have Twitter screwing up. I'm trying to show, because Tulsi Gabbard released a bunch of files And in the files, it became clear that it wasn't the case that the Russians were having intel operations. In fact, they were explicit that they were not, and that Obama manufactured the intel in order to make it look as if that is what was taking place. Now, the only reason they would do this was because they were trying to damage Trump when he was trying to come into office. But the reality of it is, they made it up. They lied. Now, it was obvious, I would argue, that they lied and they made it up. But many people went with this idea that the Russians were trying to influence the US. Now, you can make an argument. Right. That's too long. That's too long. Okay, I'll go with this. DNA Tulsi Gabbard released declassified documents exposing Obama-era buried key intelligence to fabricate the Russia scheme. On December 8th, draft intel found, quote, no impact, unquote, from Russia cyber activity on election results. The reports were pulled before reaching the president, quote, based on new guidance, unquote. On December 9th, Obama had a secret White House meeting with Brennan, Clapper, and Comey. A new politicized assessment was ordered. Right here, quote, this credited Steele dossier was used as a source in shaping the final narrative. Media were fed selective leaks to create the illusion of Trump and Russia collusion. Gabbard calls it treasonous conspiracy by top Obama officials and says she would turn over all evidence to the DOJ. Now, do we honestly believe that any of these people will be prosecuted for it? I don't. By the same token, as a scheme, as a means of trying to damage a president that's coming into office, A, it was effective, and B, if it's not criminal, it should be. It should be. I mean, let's be very clear. All things being equal, what they decided to do was try to make it look as if a president who was elected wasn't elected legitimately. Now, Trump did this also, and as I've told you, I thought Donald Trump should have been prosecuted for doing so. My point of view hasn't changed just because it's not Trump, just because it's under Obama, or for that matter, going into Joe Biden's term. The president gets elected on his own steam. The previous president works with Hillary Clinton, Brennan, Clapper, CIA, to make it seem as if that president didn't get elected legitimately, but instead was brought over into the race by foreign government, in this case, the Russians. And going back to this kind of Cold War ideology where you're using this level of propaganda to inflate this Russian threat, you do this and make it look as if Donald Trump was brought in by the Russians, like the man was a Manchurian candidate. Okay, that's pretty outrageous. Now you can see that is, you could say, well, that's normal parlance for presidents, meaning this is normal political attacks. But is it? I mean, they tried to get Donald Trump to pass sanctions on Russia because of this, something that didn't exist. And when Donald Trump said, well, no, I'm not passing sanctions like that, there's a, oh, well, obviously you work with the Russians. That's why you're not passing sanctions. Passing sanctions under that guise would have been effectively Donald Trump admitting that he didn't get elected on his own steam. He got elected because of the Russians. Now, a bit of forethought comes to that conclusion, but that is not what was pumped out into the media. That is not what was pumped out into the mainstream. Donald Trump is obviously and clearly working with the Russians. That is what was pumped out into the mainstream. That is what was pumped out into the media. Now, you can imagine if you're that president, you're going to be a bit salty over that. And you may feel some kind of way when the next election come up and you lose. No, Trump didn't lose because of the Russia stuff. Trump lost because of, I would argue, COVID and his reaction to COVID and getting 1 million people killed during COVID. But besides the point, if the CIA and the previous president were working in collusion to damage the incoming president, that is not minor. That is a big deal. And that is a big deal that should have been investigated, that should be walked through. I don't like the partisan way about this is taking place. By the same token, is there another way for it to do it that wouldn't be partisan? Meaning you're getting Tulsi Gabbard, who's effectively doing this, trying to throw chum in the water to pull support, or let's say pull eyes away from the Epstein issue. Okay, good luck with that. I don't think you're going to get that. By the same token, let's be honest that it is somewhat of a big deal that the previous president was involved in putting an intelligence operation to damage the incoming president, regardless of what Trump is. And I would accept he's a monster, sociopath, very true. But from my point of view, so are the other presidents. They may look better, they have a better veneer, but ultimately what they do is very similar. I'm saying that that is not something we should want in our political space, where one administration is trying to damage the new administration that's coming in, that won fair and square. And one last point. The inability to reach any kind of deal and agreement with Russia is directly related to this. When Hillary Clinton is making this argument that the Russians put Donald Trump in office, and you get all of these lemming Democrats who are like, oh my God, Russia is a threat. Russia is attacking us. Russia allowed Donald Trump to get in office. I've had these conversations with Democrats. This is literally the way they think. Can you ever really make a deal with a country that you believe put a quote unquote monster in office? How do you make a deal with them when one half of the political space fully believes it and has drunk that Kool-Aid all the way to the bottom and has licked the glass? How on earth can we ever make a deal with Russia? This stuff is being entirely generated by the US political space. It has nothing to do with the Russians. And even this kind of overthrow of the Ukrainian government in 2014, meaning we have taken provocative action abroad in order to go after the Russians. And when they responded, we come up with these arguments that they've invaded our politics, they've had cyber attacks against us, they put Donald Trump in office, and now on top of putting Donald Trump in office, Donald Trump's supposed want to end the conflict is now cast in the guise that Trump is working with the Russians because Donald Trump is a Russian asset. They made it all up. They made it all up. It was a mass psyop on the American public. And if you're asking me, should there be consequences for the answer is obviously yes. If you want to prevent a behavior that is taking place in your politics, there should be consequences for the behavior. I still point out that them not prosecuting George Bush and not impeaching George Bush after invading Iraq allowed every president after George Bush to do the exact same thing. Every last one. And so, should there be consequences? Yes. Will there be? Probably not. Trump turning over, or Tulsi Gabbard turning over stuff to the DOJ, I'm very skeptical that anything is going to come of this, short of this kind of just flashy politics to try to pull support and pull attention away from the Epstein issue. I don't think that's going to work. Will Bondi go for prosecutions? We'll see. I doubt it. I'm very doubtful. I'm very doubtful. I'm very, very doubtful on this. I suppose we will see as time passes. But I would point out to you to not get your hopes up. Not get your hopes up. Right here. For example, this is one of the documents that Tulsi Gabbard put out. We assess that foreign adversaries did not use cyber attacks on the election infrastructure to alter the U.S. presidential election outcome this year. We have no evidence of cyber manipulation, election infrastructure intended after results. There's more to this. There are further documents in this. Tulsi Gabbard put out a trove of these documents. But needless to say, they made it up. They made it up. They lied. They lied. They continuously lied. I am assuming that Brian Berletic is not joining us today. He is usually good on this, but apparently he has blown us off. Mark will be here in about 10 to 15 minutes. So we will be able to have a conversation with Mark. Maybe Brian can join us on a different day or later today. We'll see. Let's see. I want to go to another item. Something's going on with Twitter. I'm not sure what's going on. It's not letting me hit my okay. Let's go to a different issue. So I don't know if you've seen these videos of some of the drones. It's like these drone wars that are taking place in Russia. Some of these things are just wild to me. So let's see if I can find one. Actually, we probably should talk about Syria. There is a massive attack on the Druze community taking place in Syria. This is wild to me on so many levels. Jelani has been doing any and everything in his power to allow Israel, or to, let's say, make amends and friendship with Israel, even against many of the people who are in HTS, because HTS is made up of like 120 different groups. But he has done everything in his power. He's allowed them to blow up air defense. He's allowed them to take parts of Syria. And what they've been doing is effectively fragmenting Syria. So when Israel says, look, you can't come south of Damascus, okay, that's pretty amazing. So a foreign government is telling a quote unquote new government that it doesn't have control over space south of the capital. That is literally fragmentation. Now, in part of this fragmentation, part of the objective of this is to create this kind of greater Israel with more control over these other countries. So you attack Lebanon, you attack Syria, you take over, or at the very least trying to take over the West Bank. You're taking over all of Gaza by killing off starving off the population. You try to take Iran. Iran doesn't fall. They don't collapse. If anything, they give you a beating where you go running back to attacking Lebanon and once again attacking Syria. The key part of this, though, is that Jelani is still trying to make amends with Syria. I know Brian Berletic was making this argument that a lot of this had to do with trying to make it look as if the Syrians were fighting back against the Israelis. That's not what's happening, though. In real terms, you get Jelani, who again has not fired a shot in anger at the Israelis, but has carried out ethnic cleansing through either the Druze community, the Alawites. The Druze are just the newest community of ethnic cleansing that they are going with. But beforehand, you had the Alawites. Christians will be on that list. It seems like Jelani's job is to effectively ethnically cleanse any of the areas that may serve as any level of resistance in Syria proper. And they are doing that. The Israelis seem to be using that as a justification to get further into Syria. They are doing that. With Jelani not seemingly taking any hostile position on this at all. It is very weird. You have all of these groups, seemingly thousands, some people would say hundreds of thousands, that have come to, what is it, Sudea, I believe they call it, in order to fight, attack, and kill the Druze. You have beheadings taking place. You have bodies that are effectively laying in the streets. You have other people who are strung up on bridges. You have all of this stuff taking place in Syria as we speak right now, with the U.S. eliminating any kind of sanctions, with the U.S. acting as if this is democracy, and with even various groups acting as if this is some kind of democratic upswing that's happening in Syria. This is not a democratic upswing. This is an ethnic cleansing of minority communities in these areas. They may try to use Israel as a pretext, saying, well, we're going after the Israelis. Okay, even that's weird, considering that the leader of HTS, who installed himself as president, has been doing everything in his power to normalize relations with Israel. So the argument that the Druze community is working with the Israelis so we can go and kill the Druze community is weird and contradicted by the fact that Jelani has done any and everything in his power to work with the Israelis. It's utterly bizarre. There's a gentleman that I'm trying to get on the show who's been breaking this down extraordinarily well. He is not available today. Hopefully he will be available sometime this week. I think Esteban did a really good job at explaining this also, and did a really good breakdown of what has taken place. But it is a very weird, contradictory mayhem that is happening right now. And while there are some people who cheered this on as if this is the greatest thing in the world, I think those people are out of their minds. People who are supporting or believe that Assad being taken down was a negative, like me, did so for this very specific reason. The moment that you take away Assad, you are uncorking ethnic violence all throughout Syria. And that is effectively what they've done. And some people make the argument, I think Laith will make the argument, that that was the entire point, to destroy any notion of Syria being able to recobble itself back together, and allowing these groups that are ethnic minorities to effectively be destroyed, to create this caliphate in Syria. And that's what they've done. Turkey seems to have taken apart, or at the very least, Turkey is looking at Jelani as being his guy, and it being his guy to have this kind of over influence in Syrian affairs. Israel has taken a portion of it. Kurds have taken a portion of it, or you could say the US has taken a portion. And they've effectively been able to balkanize the Syrian state. Ideally, I would imagine, with the notion of getting closer and closer in their attacks on Iran, which didn't necessarily go well the first time, but it doesn't seem like that's something that they've effectively given up. They seem to still want to go after Iran. So the balkanization of Syria, at some part, A, to create this greater Israel, B, to create a, let's say, an infection point where you can go after Iran in a more straightforward manner. It seems to be working. It seems to be working. Seems to be something that they have accomplished. And let's be very clear. It legitimizes the point of view of people like me who said that this is exactly what was going to happen. It was obvious this was going to happen. And this is indeed what is taking place. Yeah, it's unfortunate. My heart goes out to those people. I'm not even going to show the videos of it. But you have a lot of people who are effectively showing up ready to kill. Some of these people are YouTubers, apparently. Or one guy is like a YouTube blogger who's shown up with the notion with his RPG claiming that, you know, it's time to go and kill some of the Druze community. It's outrageous, completely outrageous. But that's what our government supported. That is who our government put into power. And that is that is who they put into power. By the way, there's a lot of interviews, videos, people coming out of the woodwork who have been talking about what Donald Trump has been doing or what he's done over his life in regards to his attacks on women, or for that matter, let's say, very salacious stuff that will be illegal in any context of the word. This is an interview that took place on CNN. Again, Trump not putting out the fouls makes this worse. Not putting out the fouls makes this worse. This is CNN. They're now ramping up their interviews.
One of which is in the book.
Here.
We lived in a Trump-branded building. I remember seeing commercials for The Apprentice on TV, and I knew my dad was working for someone famous, but I think that's the extent of the realization at the time.
So it was cool. I mean, I guess at that time, it was cool.
Yeah, for sure.
But at some point, I think well before your dad got ensnared in all of this, your impression changed.
Yes.
And what was that? What happened?
There were a few instances that changed that impression, and they happened over the course of a few years as I got older and as I started to realize how Trump treated my father, one of which is in the book where my dad explains what happened at the golf course.
Let me read that.
Okay, sure.
Because I mean, I think that this one is illustrative of something. Basically, you were at President Trump's, well, he was just Donald Trump, his country club. And you were playing tennis and you came off the court. And here's how it was written in Vanity Fair. Somehow Trump's attention was diverted to another skirt walking off a tennis court. Quote, "Look at that piece of ass." Cohen recalls Trump.
Oh, dude, just release the fouls. Just release the fouls, man. Like, I can show you one where Ivanka Trump talked about Trump raping her, like literally ripping out her hair, throwing her on the bed, raping her. She goes running upstairs crying. Apparently, Donald Trump got a bad hair surgery. And he was very angry at her because apparently she recommended the doctor. I can show you another one where Epstein, again, takes a girl to Trump's office. Trump molests the woman. And she's talking about how, like, as she's being molested, she's thinking to herself, this is amazing. I can't believe he's doing this in public. He's in his office. All of these people are watching him do this. And then when they get downstairs, Epstein flips out, like, how can you allow Trump to touch you in that way? And it's like, dude, you're my boyfriend. How do you allow another man to touch me in this way? All of these stories now have started to come out the woodwork because what they're trying to point out is that they believe Trump is not releasing the files because Trump is in those files. If you would release the files, these stories wouldn't be coming out. Stories wouldn't be coming out. All of this stuff is coming out because there is a widespread belief, even among MAGA supporters, that Donald Trump is protecting pedophiles. It doesn't look good, bro. It doesn't look good. Meaning there's no look for that. That is very difficult for you to try to switch and try to make it look as if, it's not as bad as it sounds. It is literally as bad as it sounds. It is literally as bad as it sounds. I'm going to show what time we have. Okay, Marcus is going to be here shortly. All right, I'll just show this. Russian soldier spotted a drone sitting on the back of a truck and is firing at that drone while sitting on the back of his truck. This is like a daily reality of war. That drone would have taken their life. That drone would have taken their life. If he hadn't seen the drone would have taken their life. Just astonishing stuff. Like, I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to what has been taking place on the battlefield, but to call it wild is an understatement. Call it wild is an understatement. And this is just kind of the daily realities of the war. Here's another one. Where is it? I've shown you the attacks that took place on Kiev. I think I still have those up. In fact, this is good preparation for Mark when he joins. This is Kiev. Yeah. You know, I've never, for the Israelis, I've drunk coffee at their misery. I've never done that for Kiev or for Ukraine. And part of my reason and rationale has to do with the majority of Ukrainians didn't want the war. They didn't want it. When they voted in Zelensky, they voted in supposedly a peace candidate. And the thought was that Zelensky was going to make a deal, make amends, implement the immense agreements. But whatever he was going to do was going to be done in a way that avoided a larger war and a larger conflict. And it ended up being the opposite. But my man is here. Thankfully, Mark has joined us. Let me go to him right now. We're joined with Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. I'm a good friend of the show, one of my favorite people to talk to. How you doing, Mark? You doing okay?
Jamarl, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show, and I'm alive. How are you?
I am doing okay. My first guest didn't show up, and so I am carrying the burden on my own.
How dare they? How dare they?
Mark, this show to me is sacred. And so, yes, my feelings about that are pretty extreme. I'm hoping that I'm not hoping that something happened, but something important took place that would have necessitated not showing up. Short of, oh man, I just couldn't get out of bed, some stupid stuff like that. But either way, let's have a conversation. So there's been a lot of media coming. Okay, there are two things I want to talk about on this. One, I want to talk about the current status of the Russian military, where they are. And on the second one, I want to talk about this idea that's coming out of the West about Zelensky being replaced. And it's coming from a few corners. So this is Seymour Hersh talking to apparently U.S. intel or somebody in the U.S. government, making the argument, the end of Zelensky. There's another story that at the exact same time that this story came out, going with this, Zelensky accused of authoritarian slide after anti-corruption raids. Then you have another one that came out. Ukrainians have lost faith in Zelensky. Ukrainians have lost faith in Zelensky. Zelensky, for his credit, put out a post where he is saying that effectively he wants to resume talks with the Russians in Istanbul. And in this rather long post from Zelensky, I discussed with Umarov the work of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council and Supreme Commander-in-Chief and Staff, personal tasks, defense and negotiation spheres. First, continue working with the partners in arms. Second, analyze the implementation and status of decisions adopted by the NSDC. And third, intensify the negotiation track. What's going on with this? It seems, I don't believe in coincidences like this. What's going on?
Okay, so I don't actually think there's anything here. I mean, I could be wrong, but I'm seeing no other signs other than Seymour Hersh some suddenly coming forward again with his U.S. intelligence sources. And I have to say that, in general, right, at least since his Nord Stream report, I don't think that Seymour Hersh has been batting very well. I mean, I remember Seymour Hersh asserting that the Kiev regime's at the time military chief Zelensky was in secret discussions with his Russian counterpart, Valery Gerasimov, and that a peace deal brokered by the two military chiefs was right around the corner. And I mean, I remember at the time not believing a word of that, there being no evidence of it, and it simply not being the way Russians do diplomacy, right? Their military commanders in chief don't negotiate. So, and he, it has to be said, asserts that this is still going on, right? They evidently Gerasimov and Zelensky are still having chats, right? Even though Zelensky is in veritable political exile as an ambassador in the UK, which would mean that MI6 is listening in on every conversation. And he asserts again in this article where he claims that Zelensky is about to be replaced, that this is still going on. So it's not completely outside of the realm of possibility, but I see no other signs of it. I think there was a better chance to remove Zelensky, like when his presidential term had officially ended, his quote unquote presidential return. I do not believe that any elections in Ukraine since the West-backed Maidan Putsch in 2014 have been free or fair. All the real opposition in the country has been lustrated, pogromed, banned, right? So, I mean, how can you say that these are legal elections where effectively at least one half of the Ukrainian population has their political voice silenced, right? And so largely don't vote. Anyway, I don't regard any elections in Ukraine as having any validity since 2014. I understood that somewhere along the line with the Minsk Accords, the Russian government, granted the authorities in Ukraine, some type of legitimacy in pursuit of the Minsk Accords. But I've called them the Kiev regime since 2014, and the Russian government and RT are now calling them Russian, are now calling them the Kiev regime again over the last year. Nice of you guys to catch back up with me. But that saying, there were better times to remove Zelensky. Now, there has just been a shuffle of the Kiev regime's ministers, right? In the government as it is there. That was the existing defense minister, Rustem Umarov, was removed from his position as defense minister, where evidently he was seen as some kind of political problem or not sufficiently fulfilling his duties. And he was supposed to be sent also into veritable political exile as the ambassador to the United States. Now, Umarov is doing double duty now because he's also supposedly head of the Kiev regime's diplomatic team at the renewed Istanbul talks. Right. Although it must be said, I don't imagine it's actually much work because there's not any real diplomacy going on. But now the U.S. evidently said they couldn't accept him as the ambassador to the United States, right? And I've heard some claims that it's because they wanted to keep him on as head of the Istanbul talks because their Trump administration is still forcing the Kiev regime to attend the Istanbul talks. And I think that's likely probably true, right? We know the Kiev regime certainly doesn't want anything to do with them. And Russia certainly doesn't believe anything is going to come from them other than, buying time and excuses for Donald Trump to not go down the Biden footpath of more arms and sanctions. As he can say, at least there's some kind of diplomatic talks going on, even if they don't come to anything. The other story that I've heard out of the Ukrainian media is that Rustem Umarov is a dual citizen of the United States. His family is actually set up in Miami. He has an art gallery there, evidently. I mean, I never really imagined Rustem Umarov as the art-loving type, but this evidently is true. And so the U.S. said that you couldn't have someone who has U.S. citizenship also be an ambassador from that country, which also seems somewhat plausible. So take your side there. Anyway, so Umarov was removed from the defense minister, but he was not sent ultimately as ambassador to the United States for some combination of those two reasons. And instead, he's now been placed as the titular head of the Security and Defense Council. Okay. So now the existing prime minister, Denis Shmyhal, whom you've probably never heard of before because he is a bland technocrat who possesses no political threat to anyone and no political charisma or anything of the sort. He has been moved to the defense minister role. His credentials for being defense minister, he was completely loyal as prime minister. I guess that's his credentials. He's got no military, no industrial background, with the military industrial complex or anything like that. But okay, whatever. And the new prime minister is Yulia Svirdenko.
She's very attractive. Yes.
If you say so. Okay.
These are pictures. It's sweat pictures. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I'm a guy.
I've seen less attractive women. I'll give you that. Anyway, I just never crossed my mind. Fair enough. Okay, so she's the new prime minister, and her main everyone, including the Western media, right, including The Economist and everyone, says that she was appointed to that position. Basically, she's a political creature and completely loyal to Yermak.
to Yermak.
No, to Yermak personally, they say. Now, Yermak, in case you don't remember, Yermak is Zelensky's long-term gray cardinal chief of staff. And many people say that it is Yermak who really runs the country. He's definitely number 2 in terms of power at the least, if not number 1. At one time, he was director of Zelensky's comedy company before he ran for office, back in his prior life. So it is interesting. So basically what we see here is a consolidation of power by Yermak, right? And some people actually put their names together, Zelensky and Yermak, and they call them Zermak, like some kind of bro collocation or what bromance collocation or whatever. All right, so Zermak is consolidating power in Kiev. Because to rule out any potential political replacement. Yeah. Now that could be a reason if the Trump administration has any inkling again of replacing Zelensky. I see no other signs of that. I saw other signs earlier that led me greater credits. And Zelensky may be reacting to those and, had Yermak consolidating power. But if anyone was talking about that again, I don't think they were doing so very seriously.
Okay.
Now, I think it may, be, shall we say, an overreaction on both, if it's happening, on both Yermak's part and the West and Seymour Hersh's part, making a bigger deal out of it. Maybe Trump floated the idea in conversation and word got to Kiev or something like that. I mean, that's possible. But I just see no other signs that it's in the works. Zelensky has complete control of all the levers of power. His main political opponents, such as it is, within the regime, because all real political opponents, right? I mean, the head of the opposition bloc was charged with treason, as the head of most opposition parties were in the country, and then transferred to Russia as part of a POW exchange, right? The leader of the opposition party, the opposition bloc, which at one point, right before the intervention started, was actually threatening to become the most popular political party in the country in terms of at least in terms of approval ratings, polling that was done, i.e. more popular than the president's own servant of the people party. So then they charged him with treason, and that party was later banned, preventing it from becoming real opposition. But if we take a look at the opposition within the Maidan regime milieu, right, the former and first quote unquote president of the Kiev regime, the candy oligarch Petro Poroshenko. I mean, he still talks. He was also charged with treason, by the way, as the leaders of all the opposition parties were. But that the U.S. kind of made them back off of that. So it just kind of exists nebulous out there. But I haven't heard any real chatter that he is maneuvering, that he is making more noise, or that there's any new actions being taken against him would indicate that. Same thing with the mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, the boxer who was one of the figurehead leaders of the Maidan Putsch, the one that Victoria Nuland dismissed as not capable of being the new prime minister of Ukraine at one point, and he should get his training wheels. Yeah. So he regularly calls Zelensky a dictator and authoritarian, right? I mean, which it always strikes me as hilarious when you hear this from comments within the Maidan regime, right? They got no problem with him being a dictator when he gets rid of all real political opposition in the party, bans 20-some political parties. But if he doesn't share power within the Maidan, then he's a dictator, whatever. So I haven't heard anything from him either. Yulia Tymoshenko, I know that some people, she is the leader of the Fatherland Party in Ukraine, and she was once prime minister previously, and but her political star faded like decades ago, right?
Mhm.
I mean, her main voters are elderly voters in northern Ukraine. I mean, I just don't see her. I see her as a completely spent political force, and that Russia wouldn't necessarily trust in negotiations any more than Zelensky or Poroshenko or anyone else. So even if someone within the Trump administration had the idea that they could, queen, Tymoshenko, I don't think she has the political power anymore. Now, the one thing, the only other real possibility of political figure whom has gained some traction, at least I guess with the Banderite, the nationalist voting population in Ukraine, is Krylu, I like the dark Budanov, the
Interesting.
sociopathic, simply because he was making a name for himself, has been, over the speaking out in public, shall we say, to the media more often than you might think the head of military intelligence and covert assassinations should be making himself known, right? Now, evidently Yermak, again, for the 19th time, tried to get rid of Budanov, seeing him as some type of political threat, but America stepped in again. Now, there's no confirmation of this. This is all coming off of Ukrainian Telegram channels, right? Which are the closest thing to an independent media that exists in that country. So it's just, I'm putting it out there. It's what is being said. So while Budanov, again, maybe they see him as a potential political threat. I don't really see that, because I don't see Budanov as having any appeal outside. Even in the military, they hate him, right? I mean, just the nationalist component, the Banderites.
Wait,
so
why does the military hate him?
Why does the military hate him? Because he keeps sending them to their deaths. And
there's that. There's that. Okay.
I mean, he whenever he gets control of regular troops, I mean, he's normally in charge of a lot of far right battalions that get attached to the military intelligence, like all the stuff, the neo-Nazi raids into Belgorod and all of that. And also, I understand to a large degree the whole Kursk disaster, that Budanov was to a significant degree in charge of that. So, but I don't see him really as having any political wings without being Zelensky's military intelligence chief. And I haven't heard any possibility of him rising up against Zelensky. I just don't see any of that yet. So I don't know who they would replace him with. I see nothing really in motion. Zelensky just the Kiev regime's Rada just voted again to extend martial law for another 90 days, which continues conscription and keeps Zelensky as the powers of president. So, I mean, that's effectively that can kick down the road till November again. So while there are some political things, such as there are politics within the Kiev regime happening, in Kiev right now, I don't see any signs of this.
So
maybe that'll change. Maybe we'll get some more data points, but right now, as far as I'm concerned, Seymour Hersh's record on calling things in Ukraine is kind of spotted at best. And I think his U.S. intelligence sources have just been feeding him a lot of false information.
That could be the case. I mean, just because he was right on Iran doesn't mean he's right on Russia. And I remember the article. By the way, I did know Shmyhal. I look at enough Ukrainian media where his name did bubble up. Okay, fair enough. Let's go with this notion that Seymour Hersh is just getting this he's being fed something.
Until I get more information that might confirm that. I just see nothing to confirm it. And it's just the fact that Hersh has been wrong on Ukraine. Again, he asserts that Gerasimov and Zaluzhny are still in some kind of secret contact. And I saw no sign of that the first time, and I see no sign of it now. And he insists it continues again in this article, this newest article.
Yeah.
So it just calls the whole thing into question. Also, he asserted that Russia has 2 million KIA.
Yeah, that was outrageous. That's outrageous.
I don't even think the Kiev regime has 2 million KIA.
That's
right?
outrageous.
Russia, as far as even Media Zona, funded by the BBC, they can't find more than 120,000 Russia KIA, right? But 2 million?
Yeah, I assume 100,000. 2 million is outrageous. It's so
ludicrous. I would believe anywhere between 100,000 and 150. I would, right? Anywhere in that range there. By everything that we've seen, which is terrible, but of course it's a fraction of what the Kiev regime has taken, right? I mean, whatever the propaganda to the contrary about meat assaults and all of this other nonsense, the Russian military, presumably on direction from Putin, has gone absolutely out of their way to minimize their losses, right? To play this long, slow, grinding war of attrition that infuriates many people who expect some Hollywood-style maneuver warfare, U.S. and Iraq style, just not understanding modern warfare at all. But the Russian military is doing everything they can to minimize casualties to a degree that keeps 40 to 60,000 people signing new enlistment contracts every month, keeping the Russian military growing, while the Kiev regime's forced conscription of 20-some thousand people every month now has a desertion rate, has more than 200,000 deserters at this point, because they are forcibly conscripted.
Yeah.
So there's too many wrong things that Seymour Hersh is saying there to make me take anything he says without a serious grain of salt and skepticism.
Yeah, that number is so ludicrous. You would think that he would think to himself, hey, this number sounds off.
But he just doesn't seem to get there's some things that he gets, right? But the conflict in Ukraine, I think he doesn't really have he's not close to the details on the ground, and I don't think he has a good feel for it. And I think he's being fed for whatever muddying the water reason. Maybe there's some people in the U.S. intelligence community that would like to see him replaced. And occasionally we've seen this again and again in this conflict where false information is fed, probably in the hopes that someone will then in real life pick it up, right? How many times have we heard about peace talks? So the end of the conflict is right around the corner. Putin's going to agree to a ceasefire. All of this other stuff that seems more narrative construction in the hope that it becomes reality than any reality whatsoever.
Budanov says something else. I don't think we hit this in the last conversation, but I did want to get your take on it. Yeah. He pointed out, he says, the war has to end by the end of the year. And it's like, why? Meaning I couldn't tell if Budanov was thinking to himself in this kind of real world assessment, we can't keep this up.
Yeah.
And so we need to come to.
Yeah, that's what he was saying a couple different things there. One thing, previously, remember that he has said that if there isn't a ceasefire, then the Kiev regime's military will start to fall apart by about now, right? Yeah. It was about 6 months ago. And again, I've never expected a dramatic collapse where someday the Kiev regime military, just says, oh, we can't fight anymore, we surrender. I've never expected that. But we are seeing, a crumbling nearly across the contact line in many places. The Kiev regime can effectively slow down Russian forces in probably 1 or 2 places at a time, but that's it, right? And that's along the whole length of the conflict line. Everywhere else, Russia then advances at a good clip. And they're left playing plug the hole by moving troops from one front to another front, as they've repeatedly done, going back and forth between Russia's offensive now in the Sumy region and the offensive in the Pokrovsk-Konstantinovka axis in the Donbass. And they keep moving troops back and forth between those two regions. And, you know, they slow down on one side and Russia picks up on the other, and they move them back, and then you know, the reverse happens. But the bottom line is that Russian forces keep advancing. Just different, you know, resulting clips. But everywhere else along the contact line, they you know, the Kiev regime's defenses are best described as crumbling, right? So in that part, I think he was mostly right. So his most recent comments then, that, you know, there has to be a ceasefire at the end of the year, meaning that it is an imperative for the regime to get a ceasefire by the end of the year. But during that, he also asserted that it would be easy to get a ceasefire.
Yes.
And he implied that the U.S. would be involved in that. And I think what he was talking about was Trump with these 100% tariffs on the rest of the world threats. I think that's what he was mostly placing his hopes on in that regard. If so, you know,
good luck.
Yeah, good luck with that, because I don't believe that. I don't believe that Russia would respond to that. I don't believe that China or India would respond to that. You know, I don't think it's happening. If Trump goes through with it, I think ultimately it will end U.S. dollar hegemony far faster than it is already going. It will be, you know, him tightening. It will be declaring another economic war on the world, of tariffs. After his first one, right, had, you know, I don't want to say mixed results, because it really had no good results. But of course, he's pushing it up again. But this would be another one on top of that, to try to force the rest of the world outside the West, at his personal decree, to stop trading with Russia, right? Which that's I just don't see that being. Russia is far too important a commodity of finite commodities: oil, gas, grain, fertilizer, all of these things, you know, metals, all of these things that the world needs for you know, if 30,000 previous rounds of sanctions weren't enough, you know, I mean, 30,000 individual sanctions in multiple rounds weren't enough to force the rest of the world to stop trading with Russia. This new decree of tariffs on top of it is, I don't believe that it is credible. And the Russian government obviously does not regard it as credible or feasible either, when you've got Medvedev creating online poems that say, I'm sorry, I love this. This was one of my favorite of Medvedev's responses. He said something about, I don't have it right at hand, but he said something about Trump's ultimatums being political theater, and then the world shuddered, expecting the consequences, and then belligerent Europe was disappointed, and Russia didn't care.
Yep.
That summed it up for me. That's Medvedev is Putin's anger management translator, right?
I think he's the honest voice. I've said it in the very beginning. I think Medvedev is the honest voice. I think Putin is the politicized voice, but they're consistent.
Good cop, bad cop. Good cop, bad cop.
Yeah, but it's not like Medvedev is saying
the head of
different.
State and the firebrand, right? You know,
but it's not like they're saying anything different. Putin may say it differently.
I don't believe they believe anything different, right? They're not speaking at odds. Putin's, you know, professional diplomatic demeanor and Medvedev's firebrand nationalism are meant to complement each other. They're not in contradiction to each other.
Right. I want to pivot to a bit so this is what Kiev looked like earlier today. Missiles.
Oh, but all those missiles and drones were shot down. I mean, that's what the Kiev regime said.
Well, they said all but two.
Yeah, well, those two then proceeded to hit several hundred different places. all of the drones and missiles were successfully intercepted by their targets.
One person was killed.
One person. I know. I keep seeing it. That was the same thing with Russia's last strikes that focused on Odessa earlier.
Yeah.
When you're launching hundreds of missiles and drones and you get one civilian killed as collateral damage.
It's astonishing.
If there was any honesty in the world of journalism and military studies, in the future, they would be studying this conflict as the case example of how a military can engage in a high intensity conflict and minimize casualties to an absolutely unheard of degree, right?
Yeah.
I mean, compare that to what's going on in Gaza and Lebanon and the civilian casualties on both sides of the Iran-Israeli conflict, or even of Trump's recent bombings of Yemen, right, with hundreds of civilian casualties. This is so professional. I'm just continually awed by those numbers. I mean, I'm like, man, I mean, just the odds alone say that there's got to be more innocent bystanders wandering by some of these places. You know, it seems actually far more than planning. It almost seems like there's some type of luck god looking down and making sure that people stay out of the way. The number, and those aren't Russia's numbers. Those are the Kiev regime numbers. But at the same time, you get Trump saying these ridiculous things, Putin slaughtering people and everything. I mean, yeah, he's slaughtering the other side's military. But in terms of civilian casualties, this conflict has been, and it has to be said that the Kiev regime has inflicted far more civilian casualties on Russia, despite their military force being a fraction than Russia has on the Ukrainian people. Which is intentional, because the Russian government, the Russian military do not believe they are at war with the Ukrainian people. They're at war with the regime that seized power, with Western, support in 2014, and the military that it is at its beck and call. That's what, and they act on it. They continually play by that book, and it minimizes their own military casualties, and it minimizes the opponent's civilian casualties, and they avoid conflict in big cities as much as they can in pursuit of that. Right, that's been demonstrable, throughout this conflict, and I know the pace frustrates a lot of people that results from that. It frustrates me at times, right?
Yeah,
and having to counter all the propaganda. I mean, it was just last week that the latest round of the Russian offensive is sputtering out. Yeah, it's all grinding to a halt. Blah 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 again, and I'm like, what reality are you living in, buddy? Because it's just getting kicking.
Yeah. Let's go into that, because these attacks on Kiev had to do with armaments, drones, etc. Russia put out a video of their own drone production, which just astonishing numbers of drones that they were producing in one day. Yeah, what is going on the battlefield currently?
Yeah, so this was a very interesting video. There have been some actual previous releases from this plant. It's in Tatarstan, and it is the plant, or one of the plants more than likely, where the Garan, the geranium, right, which the West still calls the Shahed 136 that it evolved from, drones are produced. And we heard more shocking numbers of that coming out of German media this week, right? Yeah. So a few months ago, Zelensky warned that Russia would be up to producing 500 Garans a day, right? And then capable of using 500 Garans a day about now. And now we're seeing regularly 400 or 500 Garans a day. Last night, there were some 426, according to the Kiev regime, being sent. And then there was a word out of Ukrainian intelligence that Russia would be producing 1,000 Garans, but the production is still ramping up so fast that they would be producing double of that by the end of the year. And then Bild, the German a military assessment, comes out and says, no, they won't be producing 1,000 Garans a day by the end of the year. They'll be producing 2,000. Now, I have to say that I'm like, really? I mean, that's a huge jump. I don't see that myself. I think that is inflated, but I would love it to be true. Let's find out, right? Maybe they're opening that many new factories in other places, right? But the other thing you see is how high tech everything is there, right? And then compare this to that cringeworthy video of Hegseth in front of the Pentagon with these little FPV
Mini
drones flying
yeah.
around, declaring the U.S. a drone power in the making, right? And I'm like, yeah, that is a drone power. what we just saw there. That is the largest single drone manufacturing plant, right? And we're not even talking little FPV drones. We're talking big, long-range strike kamikaze drones, that Russia has perfected, the ones that the Kiev regime can't stop anymore because they have jet engines and they've got stealth coating and they fly and then spiral down with evasive maneuvers from extreme heights now on their targets and operate coordinated in swarms. And this is devastating. And we're seeing this effectively nightly. For a few days last week, Russia suspended the large drone attacks for like 4 days. And there was two things that came together. The first day or two, there was actually really bad weather in Ukraine. Really incidents, right? That Russia was doing, shall we say, damage assessment and stuff when he was there, or there actually was a political decision, at least not to launch big drone attacks on Kiev while he was there. Whatever, he's gone now, so it doesn't make any difference. And we saw, again, some 400 drones with missiles last night. And the primary targets are the Kiev regime's military-industrial facilities again, right? They keep popping them up again and again, and they will until this is all over. But also presumably Western weapon supplies, particularly the strikes in Western Ukraine that occurred. But they hit them at several different places. And a possibility, again, that they're still hunting down the last remaining shredded remnants of the Kiev regime's air defense as well. So yeah, big long-range strikes. Now, the Kiev regime also launched 100 or so drones last night. Their drones are much smaller, right? Pack much less of a punch. They often seemingly are actually directed at residential buildings in the suburbs outside of Moscow when they do actually hit something. But the vast majority of them are brought down because Russia actually does have a very effective, integrated, interconnected, multi-layered air defense and electronic warfare defense shield, right, over the country, right? Obviously, particularly strong around, Moscow and Crimea and Rostov and a few other select places. But the one thing that we have definitively learned from the performance of Israeli and U.S. air defense and Iranian air defense during that brief 12-day war is we see what an air defense network that really works looks like, and that's in Russia.
Yes.
I mean, nothing is 100%, right? Nothing is a magic force shield. But compared to the Patriots or THAAD or David's Boomerang or whatever you want to call it, I mean, we see what a real air defense network looks like. So the war of long range strikes, which is also an attrition war, another facet of the attrition war, continues on nightly, completely lopsided in Russia's advantage. Now, occasionally they pull out a successful hit. Last week we talked about these surprise strikes likely out of Kazakhstan. Right. But that was like one drone hit on one very large factory that caused a fire and some damage, but certainly didn't destroy anything in its entirety, or Operation Spiderweb, which I think pretty much everyone agrees now did far less damage than was. And they'll get these few asymmetric attacks through, but the point is that they are asymmetric and largely not repeatable in a sustainable way. That is what really matters in a war of attrition.
Can we talk about Petrovsk? It seems like it is under a huge amount of pressure. And you have some Ukrainian channels now that are like, oh, Petrovsk is not a big deal. Oh, it's not a big deal. It's not a hub of anything. It's, no big deal. And you and I were talking about Slavyansk, Kramatorsk for the last 3 years, that is this kind of hard shell part of Ukrainian military, but the Russians seem to be getting closer and closer to that location. What is going on in the battlefield west?
Okay, so we're talking two different places in the Donbass region, right? Pokrovsk is pretty much the last holdout in what you would call South Central Donbass. It was previously a logistics hub because multiple roads and highways meet there. It has long since ceased being so, right? It is no longer serving that purpose because it has been under siege, slowly tightening siege for several months now. The city now it's a small city, or it was, right, prior to the last few months, is increasingly it's in an operational encirclement. I think that is generally agreed to even by the Kiev regime's pro-Kiev regime military analysts at this point. All of its supply lines are either physically cut off or firmly under Russian drone and artillery control at this point. And on top of that, Russia is there's heavy fighting, essentially in the absolute worst part, right on the north side, right? Russia's moving all the way around the city and to the north side, and there's a small town by the name of Rudenko, something of the sort, that is being very heavily fought over right now. But if, and I would say when, the Russian forces get control of that, well, then it's physical encirclement for all intents and purposes. That's the death knell. And Russia's already going for the jugular there. Again, they're not taking defenses head on, right? Because they don't needlessly waste their troops, right? They're going the months-long siege to, take the place to minimize their own troops' casualties. Now, what is happening in Pokrovsk is essentially now part of more or less the same operation as the tightening of a similar encirclement around Konstantinovka, a little bit to the north, well, quite a small distance to the northeast, if you take the total of the Donbass region. Now, Konstantinovka is the tail end, the southern end of this last Kiev regime defensive line in the Donbass that we have been talking about. Well, yeah, you're right, for 3 years now. That is Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka. And there's Russia is mopping up the last suburb in Chasiv Yar, west of Bakhmut right now. And Chasiv Yar is a fight that has been going on for more than a year now. And it was a long, bitter fight. And Russia, for their military sequencing and timing, seemed to prioritize other areas at different times because timing is very important for the Russian military's plans. It's fluid, but it's also important. And it just seemed that mopping up Chasiv Yar became a months-long process that was not prioritized due to timing more than anything else. Well, now it's being timed up. And the important thing is if you look at a topographical map, you will see that the Chasiv Yar area is on a heightened elevation that then is going to look down on the valley of the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka line, right from the east, at the same time that Russian forces are moving up on that line from the southeast and the south. from the Pokrovsk area. So it's all kind of coming and tightening together slowly. Again, you hear these comments from the Western media. Oh, the Russian offensive is, faltering. It's losing steam, blah, blah, blah. It's grinding to a halt. You people have no idea what you're talking about. And the boa constrictor is tightening and tightening and tightening. And the boa constrictor, we can all sympathize with the mouse or the hair, whatever. And we can say, oh, Jesus, just put it out of its misery already. But the boa constrictor will take its time, right? Whatever we may think about it. And that's what's happening right now in the Pokrovsk and the Konstantinovka. And then you can go further and say the same things up to the last remnants of Chasiv Yar, and even further up to the very top of the theater, what's going on now in Seversk at the very last holdout in the north of the theater as well. But it's all, as a Pentagon official described it now more than a month ago, it is like a lava flow, right? The Russian offensive. It cannot be stopped. It is inexorable, and it is inevitable.
Well, Bogdanov, who's making the argument that this can only go for another year, what does it mean because you're right. When he made the point, he said something like, it's easy. And it's like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, it made no sense. And if he's arguing, well, this can only go a year, he's making an assessment based on what he's seeing. Saying
that being said, I don't think he's actually a very good military intelligence chief, to be perfectly honest. He was elevated up right after the CIA brags in the pages of the New York Times, right, that they took over the Kiev regime's intelligence, rebuilt them in their own image, right? They're quite clear about that. They brag about it. They're so happy about it. And that Bogdanov, who was in covert operations, was elevated to this role effectively by the United States. He's their man there. And he seems to have a certain type of malicious cunning, right, for covert operations, right? Assassinations, behind the lines stuff. But I don't know if that's really what you want your military intelligence chief to be, because your military intelligence chief's primary job should be understanding and managing all the data coming in on the conflict to provide that to your own military. I think he's a lot better at the covert operations, malicious stuff than he is at any real traditional military intelligence chief role.
You still think they can keep going for several years?
Zelensky has, put out plans already. I mean, this was already out weeks ago that they expect the conflict to continue until 2029.
He's out of his mind. I don't buy that. I don't buy that at all. 4 years? They think this can go on for another 4 years?
I also do not think that without Western troops, this can go on for another 4 years. But I think it could easily go on for another year or two, unless we see something dramatic change on the battlefield in the next few months.
A miracle of the Vistula. This immaculate conception.
At the end of the day, I will point out that the Kiev regime, the military is being treated, right? The manpower woes are severe. That Western military supplies are dwindling, both in terms of what they can provide and how much they can provide. But the Kiev regime is military, those 200,000 plus desertions aside, are still fighting. They're still, I'm always amazed that they're able to, one way or another, get large numbers of men to fight and women too, increasingly, to fight and die for this regime, right? I don't expect anything different from the Banderites, but even the Banderites numbers aren't really more than 100,000, all total. And the fact that they keep fighting is a continual source of, shall we say, the cold water of reality hitting that of this type of near peer conflict is hard. It's bitter, it's bloody, and even when Russia has all the advantages, they still are capable of suffering local temporary setbacks, right? And that the Kiev regime continues to fight. And if it wasn't for the nature of what they're fighting for, you would almost say stubbornly and admirably to a significant degree. I would not use those words because that's not the way I feel about the Banderite regime in Kiev. But it's still a tragedy for all the Ukrainian men whom do not have those ideological Banderite convictions and are still fighting and dying for this regime, to this day. That's I still think they'll be able to. Ukraine is big. The Ukrainian military is getting smaller and less effective. There's no question about that. But Ukraine is big. And I know the Western media likes, the talking points like running in and talking about, oh, Russia's only managed to take this percentage of Ukraine after 3 years of war, which completely shows they have no understanding about the war of attrition that is occurring. And that once the Kiev regime military has deteriorated to a certain point, then Russia puts their 2 strategic reserve armies in and things start moving much more dramatically and rapidly, at some point. And then they'll find some way to justify how wrong they've been for several years now. But the end point of that is that Ukraine is big and Russia might be forced to militarily take and occupy most of it. So when I say that this war could continue on for a long time, that has more to do with the fact of the size of Ukraine than it is of, the slugfest continuing for another 2 years on the battlefield to the same degree it is today.
Do you buy? And
then you have guerrilla war. The guerrilla war comes after.
Which is what Europe wants. Do you buy, and this could be the last question, this idea of Europe using Ukraine as a platform to attack Russia? I mean, they're saying this coalition of the willing. Personally, I don't know if I buy this. I think this is more to do with any notion of negotiations failing, that Russia can't believe in negotiations, in which case they have to keep going. But they are putting this chum in the water of saying the UK, Germany may be stupid enough to do it. Those guys look like Nazis, especially
Merz is a piece of work.
Yes, but do you think that they're legit in thinking that they're planning this in earnest?
Yeah, they have a degree of sincerity in it, no matter how unrealistic in military terms it is, because of the level of deterioration of the European military to this point. But there's I believe that there's 2 different things simultaneously. They aren't that everything. Whenever you make a political decision for a military or any other, even of just a political action, you usually have more than one reason you're doing it. People like to say, oh, it's because of this, and to bring it down to one thing. So on one hand, by continually talking about putting European troops on the ground, as soon as there is a ceasefire, you make sure there will never be a ceasefire. That is, I believe, the immediate and political need here. I also believe that at some point, the Europeans are going to have, and the Americans are going to have increased desperation and pressure to put some type of human tripwire force on the ground when Russia is moving for Kiev or Odessa, right? Crossing the Dnieper in force and these other things. Because we're seeing this hysteria now when Russia is moving on Pokrovsk in the Donbass. Can you imagine what the insanity of the Russophobic hysteria is going to be when Russian forces are moving on Kiev? Right?
Yeah.
We can't even imagine that at this point. But in that regard, I think that the European elite, the leaders of particularly Germany, France, and the UK, which is what it is to a large extent. You could also throw in Netherlands and Belgium and Norway and some other little inconsequentials, the Baltics, if you feel the need. But with all due respect to the hyenas, which are a species that I have a degree of fascination, this is like a pack of hyenas working themselves up to attacking a lion or a pride of lions, right? They're goading each other, they're laughing, they're surging forward, they're backing up, they're circling around, right? And at the end of the day, they may not eventually do anything. But right now in their minds, they're certainly thinking that they could do it at one point. And at some point, if the lion shows weakness or one hyena gets suicidally more stupid than the others, then they may all surge forward at some point, right? But that's why I say that there is a degree of sincerity, and that degree will increase at some point in the future as Russia's territorial movements in Ukraine become more faster and more significant. And that point is not very far away, right? I mean, that's within a year. So there is still the possibility for it. And anything can happen. Black swan events could happen, right? We don't know what's going to happen in the U.S. politically. Donald Trump is completely unreliable. I mean, I remember at one point almost being convinced when Donald Trump said Zelensky was a dictator. And I'm like, well, you can't just take that back. I mean, he said it. And the next week, he took it back. And I'm like, oh, you almost got me. Like, I almost bought into Trump for a second, right? I didn't, but I'm like, I was suddenly paying attention to a degree that I never had been, to Trump before. And I'm like, you can't just take back the U.S. president calling him a dictator. And the next week it was, did I say that? It doesn't sound like something I'd say. And everyone pretended. The media, everyone pretended that he hadn't said it, right? So Trump, he is a chaos bomb. He is eminently 100% unpredictable. I mean, at points, right? At some points, it becomes almost predictable what he would do.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Particularly with his puerile tantrum, his childlike tantrums and so forth. But at other times, he'll just come with an about face that makes no logical sense whatsoever because he's not operating from a position of logic. I mean, at least not logic the way the rest of the world understands it.
We will be here to cover it. Mark Sleboda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sleboda1. And you can check his channel out on Real Politic with Mark Sleboda on Boosty, Boosty. If you just put in his name, he has videos, articles, anything that he does in regards to videos and whatnot comes out on that show, on that channel. So definitely check him out.
Lots of exclusive content 3 times a week.
Check him out. Mark, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. You be safe, okay?
You as well.
All right. We have another fantastic guest who decided to join, Brian Berletic. Brian, thank you for this. I appreciate it.
My sincere apologies for disappearing there. I normally never do that. I have no idea. Yesterday I was working, and then I was like, today I think it's just a day off, right? And then I was sitting down. I was like, I'm supposed to be somewhere right now. And I checked, and you were like, "Where are you?" And my sincere apologies to you and your audience.
Oh man, I was drowning. And sometimes I've been at the radio station where I remember the worst day was when 2 guests didn't show up, and you have to cover for that. And it was like, it sucked. The last guest who was supposed to come on, let's say at 9:30, and the guy called out at 9:28. It's like, motherfucker. I was like, you motherfucker. That I think was the worst day, maybe one or 2 of the worst days on the radio station. Because you have to keep the show going. It's like the show ends at 10. And so it doesn't really matter what happens over the course of the show. It ends at 10. So if you have to be by yourself and cover it, you got to be by yourself and cover it. It's just wow. But no, man, I appreciate you joining me. I really do. Honestly, do. I always appreciate you. My audience loves you to death. So thank you for joining me. You mentioned something that I thought was funny. and I didn't believe it until I looked further into it. You said that there are some people who believe that the United States is repositioning against China, effectively believing that the US is trying to make deals with China, saying, hey, let's be buddies. Let's. And by the way, the US was openly doing this at one point, saying, hey, let's be buddies to go against the Russians. It is like, what? And then they would say, hey, let's be buddies and go against the Chinese. And people like me were like, okay, you're out of your mind. Do you honestly believe that Russia or China is going to accept this quote unquote repositioning, if indeed it's a repositioning? But as you pointed out, there's some people who actually believe that the US is somehow trying to make amends with China. Why do you, give me your take on that. Let's start there first, and we can step into it.
Well, to be more specific, they think the United States is retreating from the Asia-Pacific region, which is the exact opposite. And if you look at what the US is actually doing, yes, they're moving troops around. Yes, it looks like they're pulling back away. But what did they do right before they struck Iran? They pulled all of their forces out of the range of Iranian ballistic missiles. And then they struck Iran. They weren't retreating. They weren't leaving. They weren't saying, "Oh, we're going to pull back and then we'll make a deal with you." There was none of that. They were getting ready to blow everything up. And when you light the fuse, you drop the bomb and you run in the opposite direction. That's not retreating. That's you getting ready to blow something up. So this is what the United States is actually doing. And I urge people to please read the policy papers. They have written in great detail about what we see the U.S. doing. What the U.S. is doing is a new military doctrine, especially for the Air Force. It's called agile combat employment. And what it basically is the knowledge that China has a very capable, immense ballistic missile arsenal. They can hit U.S. airfields at basically anywhere in the Asia-Pacific region. So what the United States is going to do to mitigate this is pull a lot of their resources away from directly in the firing range of the majority of these missiles. And then they're going to spread their forces out there. They are reclaiming, old World War II air bases. They're reclaiming them, they're building them up, they're making a huge web of airfields, small airfields, and they are dispersing their forces across all of them. And they just did this Cope Thunder exercise in the Asia-Pacific region. Again, not because they're getting ready to leave, they're getting ready for war. And this is how they imagine they will fight a war with China. And one of the things they practiced was agile combat employment, where they were practicing moving F-35s to the Philippines, moving from one base to the other, one airfield to the other. This has been going on since under the Biden administration. So this is already in the works for years. They're training airmen. You join the military, the Air Force, the Marines, whatever, you get one specialty. Now they are cross-training their airmen because they understand that if you spread out you had one or two major air bases, now you have 20. Now you need 20 crews to service all of these aircraft. And because they can't do that, they're cross-training airmen to do multiple tasks outside their primary specialty, all in preparation for this type of combat. And so this is why I tell people to please read the policy papers. They explain to you what it is that you're seeing. You're seeing this, you're not a military expert, and superficially, it looks like the U.S. is moving away from China. If you read the papers, they explain it explicitly. This is us preparing for war with China, not moving away from China. And let's see, there was one other thing I wanted to say. Yes, the U.S. asking Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, if there's a war with China, what are you going to do? Australia, what are you going to do? And people were also responding to this saying, see, the U.S. isn't interested in fighting. These nations are allies with the U.S. because they think the U.S. is going to fight China for them, not the other way around. I'm just wondering, where did you get that from? Because in Europe, the U.S. is in Europe to protect Europe from Russia, but what's actually going on? We've used this analogy many times. The wood chipper is churning. Ukraine is being fed legs first into the wood chipper, and Europe is online behind them. And nowhere in sight is the U.S. They're not going into the wood chipper. They're the ones throwing one after the other into the wood chipper.
Right.
Look at the Middle East. Everybody said, Brian, are you crazy? Israel controls the United States. But we all saw with our own eyes who was being shot at with ballistic missiles for 12 days straight. Israel, not the U.S., not their bases. The U.S. paid no penalty for that at all. That was their war. It was Israel. And in the Asia-Pacific region, it will be all of these countries here in the region that are not allies, they're not partners, they have been politically captured. And that's why they do things that are irrational and contra their own best interests. When I say their own best interests, I mean the nations, the national interests of these countries, the administrations that are put into place, just like President Zelensky in Ukraine. He is just there to do whatever Washington tells him for Washington at the expense of Ukraine. And that is the same dynamic here in the Asia-Pacific region. So people are saying, why would these countries go along with this? This is the reason the U.S. politically captured them in the first place. It's the reason the U.S. maintains a troop presence in Japan, in South Korea, and increasingly in the Philippines, also in Australia.
Do you think that those countries would feed themselves into a wood chipper against China? Australia seemed very dodgy about it. And I get the sense that the South Korean government, even though the military supposedly can be handed over to the US, I suspect that part of the rationale for them trying to put in a dictator was because they didn't entirely trust South Korea to go along with. Do you think that they would actually throw themselves into a Chinese wood chipper at the behest and dignity of the US?
I think there's a good possibility that they will. And of course, there are interests in all of these countries, like there are interests, circles of interest in Europe who don't agree with what is going on. And if they could stop it, they would, but they simply don't have the means to do it. Look at all the industry in Germany that is just falling apart now. These are special interests with tremendous wealth, and they have the potential for tremendous influence. And but they do not have the type of political control over even their own country that the U.S. has. We've talked about this forever, about the National Endowment for Democracy, all of these institutions that the U.S. creates, all of these programs. The European Union itself is a layered bureaucracy the U.S. uses to politically capture Europe as a whole, with the individual nations consolidated under it. And so you have these big German corporations, but they don't have influence over the media the same way the U.S. does. And I see that here in Thailand too. There are interests here in Thailand that do not want to be a U.S. proxy, but they don't understand the full spectrum threat the U.S. poses. The way they enter into a nation to politically capture it across the whole spectrum from, it's not just the U.S., it's military and the U.S. government putting pressure on, say, the Thai government, or even just installing a client regime into power in opposition that they backed. They work their way into the education system, media. They don't just control what is on social media. They own the platforms that Thai people use for social media. So when you have this type of control over a country, even the special interest in that country, their ability to influence things pales in comparisons. This is why you see the U.S. compelling nations to do things that are just completely contra their own best interests, self-destructive things.
Wow. Yeah, that's infectious. Like the NED, National Endowment for Democracy. I love the way they name these things. Democracy. It's just wild to me. And I think it was the Australian Prime Minister. He was in China, and people were thinking, well, Australia would never do that. I mean, he's in China right now trying to make this association between these two and trying to get closer. But, I was talking to Carlos Jacques, not Carlos Jacques, I was talking to KJ No. KJ was like, dude, that doesn't matter. He was like, it doesn't matter that the Prime Minister of Australia is in China. Australia has had a history of siding with the United States in these military exercises. They're part of the Five Eyes. It may not be that simple. And so you might entirely be right. I mean, but they know that this is going to end up in a nuclear war, right?
it's just like Europe surely knew that going along with the U.S. over the conflict in Ukraine, and they're still doing it. Surely they know this ends in disaster for all of Europe. It is happening right now before our very eyes, and yet they continue going along with it. There's no sign at all of opposition. And I constantly remind people that are inclined to believe that this isn't going to happen in Asia. It's going to happen in Asia, just like it definitely happened in Europe. Before 2014, I remind people of this all the time. You had the Nord Stream pipelines were already in operation. Nord Stream 2 was coming online. There was all of this cooperation between Germany and Russia. Everybody was winning. Russia was selling its hydrocarbons and was trading and receiving products from Europe. Germany was getting cheap energy, so the rest of Europe was getting cheap energy. And then there was this growing cooperation with China itself. The Belt and Road Initiative was reaching all the way to Europe, and there were a growing list of European nations getting involved in the Belt and Road Initiative. And people said, there's no way they're going to go along with this. There's no way they're going to go along with the U.S. starting a war with Russia. And yet they did, and they all went along with it. And they all play games where they say they're not going to. They're pretending that they're pushing back. They pretend that there's some sort of divide between themselves and the U.S., especially since President Trump came into office. But it is all theater. It's all for public perception management. And if you look at the policy papers, I heard Mark Sleboda, an excellent guest, by the way, talking about how he was almost tricked by Donald Trump.
Right. He's like, he almost had me. Yeah.
Yes, and how unpredictable President Trump is. And of course, his rhetoric is extremely unpredictable. But if you just take it and just sweep it off your desk, and you take the policy paper and you just look at that, you're not going to be surprised. There is no surprise, because they have one plan, and this is what they have been reading from for decades, basically. And this is what they're going to continue to do. And the rhetoric is meant to distract you, to confuse you, to divide people against each other so that they can't unite and stand up to this policy that is going to destroy Europe and is going to destroy the Asia-Pacific region if it isn't stopped.
What is the motivation with this? Because certainly they have to be people who say to themselves, we're going to get hit. Like, for example, when I was having a conversation with people, I would say, but Israel knows it's going to get hit, right? Like, you can attack Iran, but Iran is not Syria. It's not, you're shooting dangerous babies in the back. This is a country with a proper military that has the capacity to hit you. It's like, have you ever been hit by a man in anger? Iran can hit you. And regardless of what you do in some kind of strike, your people will get hit. They have the capability of decimating your country. Yes, you have nukes, but they can also, take it as existential and just have no F's to give. And people would tell me, yeah, and they would give some kind of reason or rationale. Now, the reason I was having a conversation with people, because I was pointing out, it seems that Israel is about to attack Iran. And they were like, no, rationally, they wouldn't do that. It's like, no, they're going to do that. They're aiming for it. Everything that is coming out of them is saying they're going to do it. Why are you saying that they're not? And I think my argument or my question to them was, assuming they're going to do it, they know they're going to get hit. And I guess I feel the same way about Europe. It's like, yeah, you guys are feeding Ukraine into the wood chipper, but you're next. The U.S. has no allegiance to you. You're a vassal. And they, in order to maintain hegemony, will feed you into the wood chipper every bit as readily as you fed Ukraine into the wood chipper. And yet Europe will do it. Meaning there has to be some kind of rationale behind it. It has to go beyond some level of propaganda that is being fed to people for them to knowingly going to get hit. Certainly, Australia knows that China can reach out and pummel Australia. Certainly, Japan knows that China can pummel Australia again. What is the motivation to this? What is behind the scenes that is pushing and edging this policy that these countries know full well that they're going to get decimated, and yet they still whistle and Dixie go into the wood chipper?
Look at Ukraine. Why are they doing it? It's because the people that are in Kiev overseeing all of this, the people sending young Ukrainians, also old Ukrainians, off to go die by the thousands, it's never going to affect them. They are going to be the very last ones that pay any price for this. And they understand that once Ukraine collapses, they're just going to pick up everything they have and go. And it's not their problem. And this is the mentality people in Europe have. These are all rich, well-connected people. Whatever happens, it's not going to affect them. At least in their mind, this is what they think. I think this is what Germany probably thought during World War II. Yes, we're waging this war inside of Russia and across Western Europe, but it's never going to affect us. And this is the mindset that people have had all throughout history, a sense of impunity. And the United States, the people running the United States certainly have a sense of impunity. This is never going to affect us. We're in charge. We make the rules. And we make the laws, and the laws are there to serve us. We will never fall victim to them because we're the ones that made them in the first place. This is how they feel about all of this. But you do kind of sense a little bit of panic as well, because they see how things are kind of tilting. And this is why they're so desperate to stop this process, because if it tilts too far, that sense of impunity, well, actual impunity that they enjoy ends. And then they will be held responsible. Then they will be the ones that start paying the cost for all of this. But so far they haven't, and I don't think they will anytime in the near future. You know, the government in Israel, for example, do you think any of them actually believe something was going to happen to them personally? No, absolutely not. Were some of them even in Israel while this was happening? How would we even know? Well, we don't know. And someone like even President Zelensky, who is nobody, he is just there as part of the theater. He knows nothing is going to happen. They've told him nothing is going to happen.
Oh,
the Russians said nothing is going to happen.
Brian, I don't buy that part. I think they would strange Zelensky up in a heartbeat.
Maybe some people inside of Ukraine would do this, but
yes.
I don't think you know the West isn't going to do anything. Russia has no reason to do anything to him because he's in charge of nothing. And he does what he's told. So as long as he does what he's told, and as long as he's worth more to the collective West's alive, then he will stay alive. But you know, there is this aspect where when you do outlive your usefulness, they will just outright kill you. They'll say Russia did it, and they don't care. And the problem is they pick people psychologically, people who are not very smart. They're not very capable people. Zelensky would never have been president of Ukraine if they didn't pick him and build him up. He was never going to achieve this on his own. People like that, the ego that they have, they can't see that they're expendable. They think they're special. They think history, the momentum of history is behind them. They don't see it. And we know people even in our personal life, just around us in our daily life, people were, not really in tune with reality and some of the consequences of some of the things that they're doing. So imagine people with this amount of at least perceived power, how they might be thinking. And that's who the U.S. picks to put in as these client regimes in Ukraine, all across Europe, in the Asia Pacific region. Until she was suspended, the prime minister here in Thailand. These are not people that would have gotten in on merit. They were backed and they were put there for this purpose. And in their minds, they think they're special. They always do, until they find out the hard way that they're not.
They're not. Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, people sitting at the table, they don't believe the table will get touched. You said that they were trying to stop the process. What do you mean?
Stop which process?
Well, you said that's why they're trying to halt the process, because it doesn't seem like it's tilting in their direction.
Oh, the rise of multipolarism. If there is a shift in the balance of power around the globe away from the collective West to a multipolar world where the US and its proxies don't get to do whatever they want consequence-free anymore, if China continues to rise, if it irreversibly surpasses the collective West, if Russia is able to secure its borders and build itself back up, if Iran is able to do this, there will be consequences. There already in many ways are consequences, preliminary consequences the US and its client states are facing as the multipolar world emerges. And this is why they're starting to panic. This is why they're becoming more and more desperate. And I would say this is why they have been doing increasingly dangerous things.
Yeah. Basically, they see a multipolar world coming into fruition, and they're doing everything in their power to stop it. And they don't know how to stop it. And so they're beginning to get more belligerent and more aggressive in their actions militarily. Do you think there will be a war with China? That at some point, that they will, I guess Taiwan could be a flashpoint, but that Taiwan would ultimately be a flashpoint? Because I will tell you, the people who I speak to in China, they have a very different philosophy on this stuff. I'm an American. I was born and raised in America. My point of view is often geared around how America responds to conflicts. We would have never allowed U.S. troops to be in Taiwan if the U.S. was China. It would just never happen. We would have been perfectly willing to go to war to prevent it. And China, their thing is, we'll give it time. we'll let it marinate. We've been here for 5,000 years. Just let it happen. Just see what happens. Now, they would say, we're not going to allow this. This is intolerable. But there are already troops on the ground in China. I don't care if it's one. They're like 500, if not more. And they're continuously salami slicing the one China policy. And at some point, it will be a salami slice where they would say, hey, man, why are you freaking out like this? Missing the fact that there were, 1,000 other slices of that salami to bring you to that point where you finally have hit a red line. Give me your take on the way China is dealing with this, because I'm super curious on how you view it. Like, I'm saying this a bit weird. From China's point of view, the U.S. wants to drag us into a war. We don't want them to drag us into a war, so we're avoiding any and everything in our power to prevent us from getting dragged into a war. We know that the more time that goes by, we will be an industrial power well beyond what the U.S. can tolerate. So even though the U.S. is putting weapon systems in Taiwan, even though it's militarizing the Philippines, even though it's doing all these things, we're okay with letting it happen while we get far more industrially developed. But is that a right policy, though? Especially if the objective of these countries are, for all intents and purposes, getting more belligerent in their attempts to try to stop a multipolar war from coming to fruition. Give me your thoughts on this.
Well, I think you're right about the point of view of China and how they feel time is on their side and how they're trying to avoid war at all costs. And this is what Iran was doing too. But look at what the United States did to Iran. At a certain point, the U.S. said, we're running out of time. We don't have any more time. It doesn't matter if this is ideal or not. We need this war to start. We need to kick things off and get things moving. And so they did. And so Iran ran out of time. And I don't think that they were fully prepared for that. I think for some reason they were taken by surprise. Again, that was on a policy paper. Literally everything that
Iran was taken by surprise. I'm sorry.
I think that they were. I think that they were somehow.
That is so frustrating to me, Brian, because my channel had been saying like they're going to get attacked. They're going to get attacked.
Yes. The policy paper for 16 years said this is what we're going to do, and we're going to do it under the cover of negotiations. And every time the U.S. ramped up talk about negotiations with Iran, that was them trying to move things into position to kick off this war. And each time Russia, China, Iran itself would do things to raise the stakes and kind of push it down the road a little bit, which is exactly what China is also doing, by the way, to partially answer your question. This is what they're also doing. It's not that they're doing nothing. They are building out their military capabilities constantly to prevent the U.S. from picking a time, even if it's a little bit premature, and saying, we're out of time, we need to launch this now. The Chinese hope that the Pentagon looks at Chinese military capabilities and say, not now. We need to catch up in this area or that area just a little bit more, and then let's revisit this decision then. This is what they were doing with Iran until they just decided to kick it off anyway. And I think that they're going to do that with China. And again, it's because if a war was launched between the US and China, or US client states and China, the United States would be, again, the very last one to pay the cost. The special interests in the US would be the very last ones to pay the cost for that war. And people have to understand, this isn't the US trying to fight and win a war against China off its own shores. They want to start a conflict. They want to raise the costs for China. They want to begin destroying Chinese infrastructure, but more than anything else, they want to start hitting Chinese maritime shipping around the rest of the world. And China doesn't have the capabilities to defend its maritime shipping all around the world. Their military is it's ironic because the West says China poses this global threat, but in reality, their military cannot project military power around the globe the same way the US can. Because the US can do that, this is one of their strengths they want to take advantage of while they still have it. And so this is why by the policy papers say they're going to do this. They are preparing to do this. They have reconfigured the entire US military over the last 4 to 8 years to do this. They're training US sailors, soldiers, Marines, airmen to fight this war with China. They're not doing it just for fun. They are doing it because this is what they plan to do. And the only way it could possibly be avoided is if Chinese power was just so much more overwhelming that the day never came and China surpassed the West irreversibly to the point where the US said, if we launch this now, this doesn't even make sense to launch this now. So let's just, I don't know what they'll do at that point, but that's China's strategy. That's their plan, I think. They didn't call me up and tell me, but just looking at what they're doing, that's what they're trying to do. They don't want a war. War is bad for real business. For the U.S., war is business, but for everyone else that's trying to do something constructive around the world, war just topples everything that they're trying to build up. So they don't want it, and they will try to postpone it for as long as possible.
Well, that's the irony of it. Because you're right. Under normal circumstances, war is a destructive force. And for the U.S., we look at it as if the way things keep going, we're going to lose primacy. And so we need to create a context where we can have proxies engage, even if those proxies lose, but can get enough destruction where we maintain our primacy. That's such a effed up way of looking at the world. But that's the way we look at the globe. We'll take our ball and go home. If we can't play, we'll destroy the ball. And China is fascinating for me on this because China doesn't seem to want a global hegemony. Meaning their way of looking at the world doesn't seem, I know Mearsheimer makes this argument that China is just another hegemon in the making. I don't get that sense from him. And yet they may be forced into that position just to compete with the US and what the US is trying to do from a global plan standpoint. I know it's fascinating. Don't get me wrong, it's screwed up, but it is fascinating. Before I let you go, I have to hit Syria. You put out on your page, and I so disagree with you on this, which is why I want to talk to you about it, that the US is effectively allowing these strikes against Syria, meaning Israel, because the United States wants to give Jelani this appearance of pushing back against Israel. I have seen no evidence of Jelani pushing back against Israel at all, to any degree. He gave a muddled statement that can be interpreted if you look deeply and hard enough that, hey man, if you keep hitting us, we might be forced to respond. Which is like, okay, dude, they've destroyed all of your air defense. They bombed the hell out of you at the point where you've overthrown that government. They helped you overthrow that government, no less. They are now taking more and more territory, telling you that you cannot come to the southern part of your capital in your own country, supposedly, ostensibly. And the best that you can do is give a speech where you mutely, in a tiny sense, criticize, even though everything that he's putting out is effectively, hey man, I just want to be butts. That doesn't seem like that's giving him space to push back against Israel. It seems like he just got attacked and Israel's pushing through a plan of creating greater Israel. Give me your take on it, though. Maybe I'm getting something wrong and I don't want to mischaracterize you.
Well, you have to think about who is the audience and which media are you looking at and examining, because in the actual Middle East, there are entire groups of people who live basically in a parallel universe where President Bashar al-Assad was an Israeli-American puppet, and Jabhat al-Nusra and the 10 other aliases that it has gone by over the last 10 plus years. They're the heroes, and Iran is secretly infiltrated by Israel, and that was all staged. And you have to understand that the media there in the Middle East, to those audiences, we don't see that as Westerners. You have to go out of your way to go.
This is what they're pumping out into their media.
Yes, these people are in a parallel. When I say they're in a parallel universe, for all intents and purposes, they might as well be in a parallel universe, physically separated from us. They are not in the real world with us. So the people who were cheering on U.S., Israeli, Turkish, Persian Gulf state-backed terrorists, they thought that these terrorists were fighting against the U.S. and Israel and Bashar al-Assad, who was a puppet, who was just pretending to be a, like, you know, if you follow this long enough, you will see those reports. You will see people translating them and explaining them on Telegram. We live in a really great time for doing analysis, because you have entire Telegram channels now that all they do is translate, or at least part of what they do is they translate media stories from that region. And they have, Shia and Sunni Muslims are not natural enemies. They coexist. In Syria, before all this happened, under President Bashar al-Assad, they did coexist. Most of the Syrian Arab army, despite the president being an Alawite, were Sunni Muslims. But the U.S. and before that, the British Empire deliberately divided all of these ethnic groups, all of these religious groups into different factions, and they created their own parallel. Each one gets their own parallel universe and their own strategy of tension, where they get everybody all wound up emotionally, and they get them fighting in one direction or another. And I've warned people that Hamas is part of this. They are branched off of the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood is, for all intents and purposes, the political wing of Al-Qaeda, has been serving U.S. and before that, the British Empire's interests for generations now. The whole Arab Spring was this psychological operation where people during the Arab Spring actually thought they were rising up against the U.S. and Israel. They actually thought that when it was the U.S. who planned everything years in advance, mobilized all of these groups, all of these leaders of these protests and the militants. They were all prepared by the U.S. years in advance. And I showed this mountain of evidence to people. There were the leaders were literally in the United States years before this, like 2007, 2008. With the executives of Google and Facebook, and it was called Twitter back then. Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, did like a Skype call to these, protest leaders. They equipped them, they funded them, they instructed them, and they sent them back to their respective nations in the Arab world to overthrow them come 2011. That's what actually happened, but a lot of people think that was a legitimate uprising against the U.S. and Israel, that somehow the U.S. just hijacked and turned around into these wars, where these were all prepared well in advance. All of the evidence is there. But because these people live in a parallel universe, because of their emotional investment into what is going on there, and also the media that they consume, which is deliberately deceiving them, from their point of view, up is down, left is right. The U.S.-backed Al-Qaeda are actually freedom fighters fighting against U.S. imperialism and against Israel, even though Israel's giving them ambulance rides and harboring them along the Israeli border all throughout the 2011 to 2024 war to topple the Syrian government. So to Western audiences, we hear these milquetoast comments from Jolani. But in the region, he is saying we are the only ones actually fighting back against Israel, and he needs. Are
you serious?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
That is.
Yes, and people believe it, And why does he have to do this? And why are they doing this now? Because the region just watched Iran pummel Israel for 12 days straight with ballistic missiles, and it's very hard, even with these parallel universes that these people live in and control over the media. Everybody saw that. Some of them physically saw the missiles going over to Israel. And so you need to do something to top off at least the illusion of al-Jilani and HTS's credibility. So they have this conflict. And if anyone thinks this sounds far-fetched, what was the war on terror, the U.S. global war on terror? The U.S. was behind ISIS and al-Qaeda all along, and yet they fought a 20-plus year war against ISIS and al-Qaeda. They're still fighting ISIS and al-Qaeda. So this is just the same old game. This is the latest iteration of it.
That's mind-blowing. Like, because you must understand, like, all of the data that I see coming out of Syria is Jilani begging Israel to be buds. Hey, man, let's be buds. Let's just be friends. Why we got to fight? Hey, you can blow up some of the armaments. Hey, you can take part of Syria. We can still be buds. That's what you see coming out of Israel, like Syria. And you think to yourself, okay, there are like 100 different groups that's part of HTS. Many of these groups hate Israel's guts. And you get this kind of weird scenario where they're like, we're going to go and kill the Druze because the Druze are working with Israelis. And it's like, dude, your main guy.
You're working with Israel. You've been working with Israel all along. But they don't see it. It's just like when I was in the Marines. At first, I didn't see it. I was completely brainwashed. And then I think just by luck and a lucky series of events, I woke up to it. And I'm sure that there's people in the region who are waking up to it, but so many more people. And just like with the US military today, there's still plenty of eager, brainwashed people who join it and completely believe in the illusion of all of it. And so the US military is not the only game that they play like this. They also do this with all of these proxies that they control around the world. They do the same thing here. In neighboring Myanmar, you have these all these ethnic groups that have been fighting each other since the British Empire colonized Myanmar when it was called Burma. And they're still killing each other over the illusion of division that the British Empire created, that the US and the British still to this day invest into. And these people think they're fighting for their country while they're physically burning it to the ground every single day. It's like, how do you do that? Well, people are being driven by ideology and emotions, not by logic, reason, and facts.
How should we think of the Druze thing?
You look at
it and you think to yourself, okay, this is weird. Like, you have a community that is in Israel that seems to support Israel, that is the ethnic minority in Syria that is being mercilessly killed, remorselessly just murdered. I can show videos of people's heads being severed. I can show videos of people being strung up, like on bridges and whatnot. I mean, the stuff that's coming out there is astonishing. Like, they're just chopping off heads. And Israel takes it and says, okay, well, we don't want that to happen. And so we're going to do airstrikes to warn Jilani not to keep doing that. Jilani pulls his forces back from the south. But then you get others who are there saying, look, we're not part of the force at all, so we can stay here and just keep killing the Druze. You get seemingly hundreds of thousands of randos who have went to the area, they went to Sudaya, I believe, in order to murder the minority population. I had Laith on the show. Laith made the point of saying the entire point of Jilani creating this caliphate was to destroy any group in Syria that may create a resurgence in Syria. But there are many elements of the Druze that actually back the Israelis. It's just very strange. Like, it's a very strange mix of what's taking place on the ground that I can't wrap my head around.
Well, you could be certain that not every single Druze, that they're not supporting Israel. Not all of them are supporting Israel. But if you create this life and death situation, you get the circling the wagon effect, and they will cling to anyone that offers them stability, peace, and safety. And if that's Israel, or if it's the United States for the Kurds for so many years, then you get this extremely loyal, consolidated force in the region. You neutralize it as a potential force that will rise up. So it's exactly the same thing as if you just killed them all. Now you've consolidated them, and now you can use them. And I have warned people forever that the whole conflict against Syria wasn't just to topple it and put a client regime into power. It was to turn it into a springboard where they can take these armed militant groups and then go out in every direction, attack and undermine whatever is left of Iran's network of allies in the region, and perhaps attack Iran itself. A lot of these ethnic groups have counterparts inside of Iran that they will work with, just like what they've been doing with the Kurds. So the U.S. and Israel have been working with different Kurdish groups. And then, of course, if you follow this all along, there's Kurdish groups that end up fighting each other. And this is what happens when you play divide and conquer. You will get groups of people who believe in it a little bit too much, and they start taking their own initiative. And that's when you see the U.S. bombing these people, killing different, supposed leaders and everything. They're really killing these people, probably because they're exceeding the mandate that they're supposed to have within the parameters of what the U.S. is trying to do. Wow. And then sometimes they just kill people because they need to keep up appearances. And, it's not staged. The U.S. loves killing people. I don't know why people in the U.S. Constantly think that everything is being staged. It's fake. It's not happening. The U.S. and the West in general love killing people. This is all they've been doing for hundreds of years. It's easier to do than to stage everything. And plus, they just like doing it. And plus, they make tons of money doing it with all the weapons. And again, for people who think that Israel is somehow going off script, just and undermining the U.S. position in the region, if anyone thinks that, I don't know if anyone thinks that regarding this ongoing conflict in Syria. Yeah. Whose weapons are they doing all of this with? And whose weapons could instantly stop and never be sent to Israel again if Israel did actually go off script? So when these things are happening, a lot of it is theater. If the U.S. really wanted Israel to stop doing anything, to have all of the leverage in the world to do it. And part of this idea that Israel controls the United States is to convince people that somehow it's the other way around. The U.S. is powerless. And this absolves the U.S. of responsibility for all of these things.
No, it does not. No, it does not.
Which is the same, which is the whole point of having proxies in the first place, is to create distance between yourself and the dirty work that's being done.
Yeah, I think they want to balkanize Syria. I think they want to create that greater Israel. And the U.S., as you point out, I don't think it is a rogue actor in the least. As you point out, they can stop the weapons tomorrow. They can stop the money tomorrow. They can, hey, stop. In which case, what is Israel going to do? They have to stop. They can't afford to do these wars without the U.S. support behind it. Brian, you're fantastic. You really are. You do great work, man. And I've said this on more than one occasion. There are very few shows that I watch because I don't get the opportunity to do so. Yours is one of the most informative. And I remember before I even knew who you were, I saved one of your shows because it was so well done. I was like, wow, this is so good of an explanation. Let me save this content. I didn't even know who you were at that point. And that, I guess I'm saying that to show the work that you do great work on your channel. Brian Berletic, he is Bangkok-based geopolitical researcher, writer, and host and creator of the new Atlas. You have my appreciation, Brian. Thank you for this.
Thank you.
Be safe, man. All right, we have come to the end. Let's go through chats real quick. Windy USA, I could watch Jamal speak for 3 hours. I do not want to speak for 3 hours. Guests are icing on the cake. Windy, I appreciate that. I do not want to speak for 3 hours. I don't even want to speak for an hour if I can help it. Especially if I haven't had something prepared for it. It's one thing if you have a prepared show. It's another thing when the person just doesn't show up. That's a whole different animal. You need to kind of carry the show on your own. That is not my want. That is not my aspiration. That is more of a holy shit moment. Let's see. Kevin Wayne, Syria Resources Archive. Janice Korthamp. I'll go with that. U.S. citizen, been there 7 times. Worth looking it up. I can try to put you guys in touch. Please do. Please do. You'd be surprised how many people put me in contact with other people that helps book guests. So, Kevin, Wayne, yes, thank you. My email address is below in the thing. Definitely hook me up with the person. I'm always open to new guests. My guest shapes my point of view of the world in many respects. There's some I agree with, some I disagree with, but getting both helps you orient where you are. It's like there's always this question, where's the floor? If that makes sense. It's like, what's real? What's solid? What's the reality of things? No, I don't have the expectation I'm going to hit reality exactly, but I want to get as close as possible to what it is. It's sometimes more complicated. So, Kevin, my point is yes, please do. Send me email. If you can hook us up, please do so. Seriously complicated. Like, it's honestly complicated. I've had so many guests that have been there plenty of times. I've had my old producer, used to have family that lived there. And I remember one day he was trying to break down the fault lines, and it was just bewildering. It's one thing if you are in it, your family members, it's kind of like being in the US. Some of the people who used to work at the radio station didn't get the US. They didn't understand it. They lived here, but they didn't get it. They weren't from here, especially when you got into like racial stuff. It just was a mystery. It was like, I don't understand why you guys act this way. I don't understand why you think this way. It's like, well, it would make sense if you were born here. If you're born here, it makes all the sense in the world. Michael Sherry, always interesting and informative. Keep up the good work. Well, Michael, thank you, man. I appreciate it. I do appreciate it. Wanda, the USA is politically captured since 1913. We don't have free quality healthcare, education, quality drinking water. Bullshit wars only. I don't know what politically captured. Well, it depends on what you mean by politically captured. It depends on what you mean. You're talking about the First World War, Woodrow Wilson, Dead Reserve, with Woodrow Wilson made this comment about how the U.S. has been taken over by moneyed interests. It's a capitalist country, right? I mean, I know we act like being a capitalist country is fish and water. It's nonsense. There's always a side. Meaning, I don't know if this notion of neutrality exists, where there's just water and we're just fish in it. They may make it look that way. They may make it come across that way when they talk about other countries. They may act like, well, those countries have a bias towards X or Y. So do we. So do we. We're a capitalist country. We're a capitalist nation. What that means is that the people with the means and the people with the money are going to have, by definition, an advantage in the way that the country operates. Your latitude of freedom is determined by how much money you have in your wallet and how much money you have in your bank account. And so this idea that we're fish in water is nonsense. The water has a direction that it flows, just like in China. China, you can make an argument that they're a communist country. They are a communist country. But it's almost like they ride a capitalist animal where they use the resources in order for the betterment of China itself. The stuff that they make, the build, it's just astonishing stuff. I mean, even from the standpoint of space at this point, it is an amazing thing. But again, you could do that if you're using the trillions of dollars that you're able to make and grow to the betterment of the country itself, as opposed to buying new yachts and new houses and new, I need my third house, that type of nonsense. Depends. You make a choice as a country. What do you want to spend your money? And then to make it even worse, you're creating money out of thin air. So you create $10 trillion to have a war in Iraq and Afghanistan, where you have a $36 trillion deficit. And you continuously pile more and more money onto it in order to give more and more to the rich. It is outrageous. But that is the way our country operates. So if you're saying we're politically captured, yes, you're right. We're absolutely politically captured. But let's be very clear, though. It's not just being politically captured. You have a fundamental system that works towards the interests of maximizing profit. It's that. It's in the BRICS. It's the fact that you're a capitalist country in and of itself that creates the issue. You could say you're democracy and that the democracy supersedes the capitalistic imperative. Okay, that sounds nice. But over time and in practice, it doesn't work that way. You may have political leaders that buck the trend, that tries to pull the lever in a different direction. But it's so few and far between that it's almost like not talking about it at all. FDR is considered an icon because he was one of those people that bucked the trend. But why did he do it? He makes the argument, I saved capitalism. I saved the way that we operate in this country, because what was coming behind it was this kind of revolution of people because of the situation that those people found themselves in. Is it possible to reach another person who may do? Maybe, but it's kind of hard to see how you do that with the Congress that you have at your disposal, with the political system you have at your disposal, with the media you have at your disposal. It's almost like it has to crash first before you get anything different. So, Wandy, yes, politically captured, agreed. Agreed. I don't know how you get out that box, though. Don't know how you get out the box. Fullman dissident. Which Trek uniforms did you like the most? I am partial to TNG. I like Deanna Troy's outfit. I like her short skirt. I had such a crush on, God, I had such a crush on Deanna Troy. I had such a crush on Deanna Troy. Part of it had to do with, well, obviously she was gorgeous. The other part was that she was Betazoid, that she could read minds. And you think to yourself, how does that work in practice? Do you really want your wife reading your mind? Ugh. Even if you're just reeling your feelings. There are noble lies. There are noble lies. I do believe noble lies exist. And those noble lies exist for a reason. Because sometimes what's true is not always what you think, if that makes sense. Like there are larger truths that go beyond the individual thought of the moment. I may be very pissed off at my dog at the moment, but I love my dogs. I hope that makes sense. Your wife, girlfriend, whatever, may do some shit that pisses you off, but that's not the totality of how you feel about the person. It supersedes this kind of transient emotions that take place. Yeah, I don't know. It was something about the fact that she could read minds that turned me on. There's yeah, I'm not sure, Foment. Maybe TNG. Yeah, maybe I can go with that, TNG. I mean, but to be honest, was TNG all that different from Voyager? I did not like Deep Space Nine. That show was so dark. Let's be fair, Deep Space Nine is my favorite Star Trek. But I gotta be honest, the first time I saw it, I didn't like it. It's so dark in comparison to this kind of bright point of view that is expressed through TNG. When people think of Star Trek, they often think of Picard. You know, we're not a military, we're exploration. That is not the entire point of Star Trek. But then when you get to Deep Space Nine, you have a much heavier, darker show. These guys are taking over after, for all intents and purposes, a genocide was being committed over an entire planet. Okay, well, all right, right off the bat, you start off dark. Kira was a terrorist. Like she owns it. Yeah, I kill people for a living. That's what I did. Okay, you're in a dark place. If you think of the Star Trek episode where they were talking about terrorism, they didn't even show that episode in Britain. They literally got rid of that episode in Britain because they didn't like the argument that Picard had to make, where Picard was just stuck with, yeah, sometimes shit need to be blown up. He was like, yeah, like basically he didn't have an answer for it. And him not having an answer for it was honest, because he didn't want to own that sometimes you're put in a position where you need to blow shit up. It's the right thing to do. Yeah, I don't know, man. I will go with you on TNG. I'll go with you on that. I'll go with you on that. I'm not going to fight you on that one. All right. I am going to end this. We had a damn good show today. I want to give a shout out to Mark. I want to give a shout out to Brian. Both of them are people I enjoy talking to. Both of them are very informative. I think that's it. I want to say count the lights. There are 4 lights. Oh, that is a horrible episode, right? That's so dark. That episode was so dark. They beat the shit out of Picard. That is so dark. At the end of that episode, if you remember where Picard was like, he says, at the end, I think I saw 5 lights. They tortured Picard the entire episode. And that's just rough. That is rough to watch. That is a rough episode to watch. Let's see, what is this? What about the women? All talks about wars. What was that? All talks about wars and conflicts. Billy Box. I mean, that's what we're talking about. It's we're dealing with wars. Is what it is. I always can see the Ferengi amongst, what is that? I always see the Ferengi amongst large butt cheek heads. Yeah, the butt cheek heads are kind of gross. But there's a logic to the Ferengis. Yeah, there's a logic to them. It's swell. All right, I'm going to end this. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. You guys are fantastic. I will see you here bright and early tomorrow morning. You can always support the content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chats, Super Stickers, memberships, all of those things support the content. All of those things keeps the show ticking along. And you have my deepest appreciation for all of it. Buy me a coffee. That's another one that people tend to use. Thank you for keeping the show going. They often demonetize these shows because of subject matter. But your assistance helps keeps it moving along. So you guys have a fantastic day. Daddy Haiphong, he didn't show up. He just blew us off. He just blew us off. So yeah, there's that. I did point out that he was flaky. So I was correct. All right. I'm going to say like. I'm going to say share. I'm going to say subscribe. You got a fantastic evening or what's left of it. And I will see you bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good one all and be safe. I know, right? Happy Monday.